Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Margaret Steelwater, and I've been a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 11 years. Before that, I was a nurse for 6 years, so I know the difference between real emergencies and people getting worked up over nothing. I'm telling you this because what happened to me last October sounds crazy, but I'm a scientist. I have a biology degree. I've written papers about how animals behave in these mountains, and I'm telling you the truth. I grew up hearing stories about mountain devils from the old-timers around here. Cherokee legends about fire-breathing creatures they called kekle-kudle. My grandmother used to scare me with tales about devil dogs that lived in the deep woods. I stopped believing in monsters when I turned 12 and started studying real animals instead. The Appalachian Mountains are home to black bears, coyotes, bobcats, and hundreds of other species I've tracked and studied. In 11 years working these trails, I've seen every predator that lives in Virginia. There's nothing here that science can't explain. That's what I believed until October of 1978. The Devil's Backbone Ridge sits about 8 miles east of Skyline Drive, accessible only by an old, unmarked trail that most hikers never find. It's a narrow strip of rocky ground that runs along the ridgeline, with deep ravines dropping off on both sides. The radio doesn't work up there because of the mountains. Cell phones don't exist yet, so when you're on that ridge, you're completely alone. The Cherokee used to consider it sacred ground. There are old burial mounds up there, stone cairns that mark where their ancestors rest. When the Civilian Conservation Corps built trails through the park back in the 1932, they tried to put a camp on Devil's Backbone. The workers left after 3 weeks. The official report said they ran into construction difficulties. The workers told different stories about things that howled in the night and eyes that watched from the darkness. I never paid attention to those stories until the livestock killings started. It was the second week of October when Sheriff Coleman called our office. Someone was killing cattle on farms near the park boundary. Not just killing them, tearing them apart. The strange thing was, whatever did, it wasn't eating the meat. It would kill a cow or a horse, then leave most of the carcass behind. That's not normal predator behavior. We need someone who knows about wild animals. Sheriff Coleman told my supervisor, "These aren't normal attacks. They sent me because animal behavior is my specialty." I packed my standard gear. Tracking kit with plaster for making casts of prints, my camera with the telephoto lens and flash system, tranquilizer gun, regular firearm, radio, and camping equipment. I figured I'd find evidence of a sick bear, or maybe a pack of feral dogs. Something explainable. The first farm I visited belonged to Bill Henderson, about 2 miles from the park entrance. He walked me out to his back pasture where he'd found his bull. Nothing I'd learned in 11 years of wildlife management prepared me for what I saw. The bull weighed maybe 1,200 pounds. Something had grabbed it by the throat and shaken it like a dog shakes a toy. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was the burns. The flesh around the bite wounds looked like someone had held a blowtorch to it, black and crispy around the edges, with the meat underneath cooked all the way through. The smell wasn't just death, it was barbecued death, mixed with something that reminded me of sulfur. "What kind of animal breathes fire?" Henderson asked me. I didn't have an answer for that. I knelt down next to the carcass to get a better look. The bite marks were massive, bigger than any bear's mouth. Bigger than anything that should exist in these mountains. When I touched the metal ID tag on the bull's ear, it burned my finger. The tag was still hot, 6 hours after Henderson found the body. That's when I noticed the ground. In a perfect circle, about 20 feet across, every blade of grass was brown and dead. Not just dead, burned. Like someone had poured gasoline in a ring and lit it up. But there was no smell of gasoline. Just that weird sulfur stench that made my nose burn. I took out my camera to document everything. The flash fired. But when I looked through the viewfinder, the display showed nothing but darkness. I tried 3 more shots. Same thing. The camera worked fine when I pointed it anywhere else, but every photo of that dead bull came out completely black. That's been happening all week, Henderson said. TV cameras, newspaper photographers, even the police cameras. Nothing comes out right when you try to take pictures of these kill sites. I got out my radio to call for backup. Static. Pure white noise, even though I was only 2 miles from the main road. The emergency beacon on my belt wasn't working either. According to my compass, magnetic north was spinning in slow circles. I'd never seen anything like it. I made plaster casts of the prints I found around the body. They looked like dog prints, but massive. 8 inches long and almost as wide. The strange thing was, the ground around each print was scorched black, like the paws that made them were on fire. The trail led north, toward Devil's Backbone Ridge. I followed it for about a mile through thick forest. Every 100 yards, I found another set of burn marks. Not random burns, they formed a clear path through the woods. Whatever made these tracks was moving with purpose, heading straight for the ridge. That's when I started seeing the trees. Every tree along the trail had claw marks carved deep into the bark, not scratches, gouges that went 3 inches into solid oak and maple. The marks were 8 feet off the ground. I'd have to stand on a ladder to reach them. The claw marks were still warm. I found Johnny Crowfeather sitting on a fallen log about halfway up the trail. He's a Cherokee elder, maybe 70 years old, who sometimes helps the Park Service with historical information. I wasn't surprised to see him. He seemed to show up whenever strange things happened in the mountains. "You shouldn't go up there alone," he said without looking at me. "Why not? The Azgaya Gigajai are awake. The fire dogs. Someone disturbed the sleeping places." I'd heard those words before, in the old stories, but I'm a scientist. "Johnny, we're dealing with an unknown predator, probably an escaped exotic animal or a sick bear. There's no such thing as fire dogs." He looked at me with those dark eyes that seemed older than the mountains themselves. "Margaret Steelwater, you know these woods better than most. You've tracked every animal that lives here. Tell me, what animal leaves burns in its footprints?" I didn't have an answer for that either. "The boundary survey," Johnny said. 3 weeks ago, they drove stakes through the burial mounds, woke up things that should stay sleeping. I remembered the survey. The Park Service was relocating some boundary markers along the ridge. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual about it. "Superstition?" I said. "Maybe," Johnny replied, "but the fire dogs don't care if you believe in them or not." As the sun started setting, I made my decision. I had a job to do. Unknown predator or not, I needed to track this thing to its source before it killed again. The trail led up to Devil's Backbone Ridge, so that's where I was going. "I'll be back tomorrow," I told Johnny. "If you come back," he said. I set up camp about a 1/4 mile from the ridge, in a clearing where I could see in all directions. The old CCC camp was up there somewhere. Concrete foundations and rusted equipment left over from the 1932nd. If something was living on the ridge, that's where it would den up. I ate a cold dinner and checked my equipment. The radio still produced nothing but static. My thermometer was acting strange. It kept showing temperature spikes for no reason, jumping from 45 degrees to 80 degrees and back again, like something very hot was moving around just outside my camp. Full darkness came early under the thick canopy. I sat by my small fire and listened to the normal sounds of the forest. Owls calling, branches creaking in the wind. The distant sound of water running over rocks in the ravine below. Then I heard something that shouldn't exist. It started as a low rumble, like a truck engine idling in the distance. But it was coming from the ridge above me, where no vehicle could possibly go. As I listened, the rumble became a growl. Then the growl became a howl that echoed off the mountains like nothing I'd ever heard. It wasn't quite wolf. It wasn't quite dog. It had a metallic quality that made my teeth ache. And underneath it, I could hear something else. Something that sounded like flames crackling. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. 2 red eyes reflected back at me from the tree line. Not the green or yellow shine you get from normal animals, pure red, like glowing coals. The eyes were 12 feet off the ground. I clicked off the flashlight and sat perfectly still. When I looked again, the eyes were gone. But I could smell sulfur in the air, stronger now, and I could hear something moving through the forest. Heavy paws on fallen leaves. breathing that sounded like a bellows working. My fire started acting weird. The flames turned from orange to blue, then back to orange. The temperature around my campsite jumped 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. Sweat ran down my back despite the October chill. That's when I heard my partner's helicopter. Mike Ravenwood was flying the evening patrol, checking on the backcountry campsites. I grabbed my emergency mirror and started flashing signals toward the sound. The helicopter circled my position twice, then landed in the clearing next to my camp. "Jesus, Margaret," Mike said as he climbed out, "I could see fires burning all along this ridge from the air. Thought you might be in trouble." "What fires? Look for yourself." I climbed into the helicopter and Mike lifted us a few hundred feet above the tree line. Looking down, I could see at least 6 different spots where orange light flickered through the canopy. They moved in a pattern, like someone carrying torches along invisible trails. But from ground level, I hadn't seen any flames at all. "Are you sure those are fires?" I asked. "What else would they be?" We landed and Mike helped me gather my gear. 2 people would be safer than one, and he had camping equipment in the helicopter. We set up a second tent and built up the fire. That's when things got really strange. Around midnight, the temperature spiked to over 90 degrees. Both our thermometers showed the same reading. We stripped down to t-shirts and still felt like we were sitting in an oven. The air shimmered with heat waves, but there was no source, no fire, no sunlight, just invisible heat that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then we saw the first one. It came out of the tree line like smoke given shape. As tall as a horse but built like a wolf, with muscles that moved like liquid under black fur. Its paws left glowing prints in the dirt. When it opened its mouth to pant, I could see flames dancing on its tongue. "That's not possible," Mike whispered. The creature looked at us with eyes like burning coals. Not angry, almost curious. It tilted its head like a dog, hearing a strange sound, then took 3 steps closer to our camp. Each step left a smoldering paw print in the ground. "Don't move," I told Mike. "Don't even breathe loud." The creature circled our camp once, staying just outside the firelight. I could feel the heat radiating from its body. I could hear its breath crackling like a campfire. When it finally disappeared back into the forest, it left a trail of singed vegetation behind. "Did you see that?" Mike asked. "I saw it. I don't believe it, but I saw it." We didn't sleep that night. Every hour or so, we'd hear that metallic howling echoing across the ridge, sometimes from one direction, sometimes from another. By dawn, we'd counted at least 3 different voices. A pack. When the sun came up, we broke camp and headed for the ridge. I had to see the CCC site. I had to understand what we were dealing with. The old camp sat in a natural clearing about 100 yards from the highest point of Devil's Backbone Ridge. Concrete foundations marked where the barracks and mess hall used to stand. Rusted equipment and broken tools lay scattered in the weeds. But someone had been living there recently. 3 fire rings had been built among the ruins. The stones around each ring were black with soot and cracked from extreme heat. When I touched one of them, it burned my hand. The rocks were hot enough to fry an egg, even though no fire was burning. I found a metal toolbox that had been melted into a twisted sculpture, a shovel blade that had been heated until it bent into a pretzel. Whatever built these fires burned hotter than anything I'd ever seen. That's when Mike found the bones. In the center of the old camp, someone had arranged animal skeletons in careful patterns around a ring of ancient stone cairns. Deer skulls, bear bones. The complete skeleton of what might have been a horse, laid out like it was sleeping. But these weren't just random animal remains. They'd been arranged with purpose, forming shapes that reminded me of the Cherokee symbols I'd seen in museums. And they were old. Some of the bones had been bleached white by years of weather. "Look at this," Mike said. He was standing next to one of the stone cairns, holding a piece of paper. It was a page from a diary, yellowed with age, but still readable. The handwriting was faded but clear. Asterisk, the 15th of July, 1933. Third night on the ridge. The hellhounds came again. Jenkins won't stop crying. Says they're as big as bears, but move like smoke. Thompson saw one breathing fire near the burial mounds. Foreman says, "We'll be moving the camp tomorrow." Says the Cherokee warned us not to disturb the sacred places. Should have listened. Asterisk, I knelt down next to the cairn. It was one of the burial mounds Johnny had mentioned, older than the European settlement of Virginia. Someone had driven survey stakes right through the center of it, breaking apart stones that had been placed there centuries ago. That's when I heard the breathing. It came from all around us, like the forest itself was alive. Deep, rhythmic breathing that sounded like wind through a cave. But there was no wind. Mike grabbed my arm. "Margaret?" 3 of them stood at the edge of the stent, clearing, watching us. They were even larger than the one we'd seen the night before, and in daylight I could see details that made my scientific brain shut down. They weren't quite dogs, and they weren't quite anything else. Their fur was black as midnight, but underneath it their skin glowed like coals in a dying fire. Their paws were the size of dinner plates, with claws that left scratches in solid rock. When they breathed, small flames flickered around their nostrils. The largest one, standing in the center, had scars across its muzzle that looked like old battle wounds. It was staring directly at me with intelligence that went way beyond animal instinct. This wasn't a predator looking at prey. This was something ancient and powerful deciding whether we deserved to live. "Back away slowly," I whispered to Mike. We took one step backward, then another. The creatures didn't move, but I could feel the temperature rising. The air around them shimmered with heat. Smoke started rising from the dry grass at their feet. That's when Johnny Crowfeather stepped out from behind one of the concrete foundations. "Askaya Gigaiji," he said in Cherokee, then switched to English. "Fire dogs. Guardians of the sacred places." The lead creature turned its burning gaze toward Johnny. For a moment, I thought it would attack him. Instead, it lowered its massive head in what looked almost like a bow. Johnny walked slowly toward the broken burial mound, speaking in Cherokee the whole time. I couldn't understand the words, but his tone was respectful, apologetic, like he was explaining something to old friends. The fire dogs watched every move. Johnny knelt next to the survey stakes that had been driven through the cairn. He pulled them out one by one, then began replacing the scattered stones in their original positions. As he worked, he continued speaking in the old language. The creature's flames began to dim. "They're not evil," Johnny said, without looking at us. "They're guardians. They protect the sleeping places of our ancestors. When the survey team drove stakes through the burial mounds, they woke up angry." "That's impossible," I said. "Animals don't." The lead fire dog looked at me again. This time, I felt heat wash over my body like standing too close to a bonfire. My hair started to curl from the temperature. Sweat ran into my eyes. "Some things are older than your science, Margaret Stillwater," Johnny said. "The Cherokee have known about the fire dogs for 1,000 years. They guard what's sacred. They punish those who show disrespect." He finished rebuilding the burial mound and stood up slowly. The fire dogs watched him with what I can only describe as approval. Their breathing had calmed from the crackling sound of flames to something more like normal dog panting. The lead creature approached Johnny until they were only a few feet apart. For a long moment, they looked at each other. Then, the creature opened its mouth and breathed out a stream of warm air that smelled like wood smoke and mountain herbs. Not fire, just warm breath, like a blessing. Johnny reached out and touched the creature's massive head. Its fur didn't burn him. "They want to go back to sleep," Johnny said, "but they need to know the sacred places will be protected." He turned to me. "That's your job now, Margaret. You know these mountains better than any other ranger. You'll make sure no one disturbs the burial grounds again." I looked at the fire dogs, then at the restored burial mound, then at Mike, who was staring with his mouth open. "I don't understand what's happening here," I said. "Understanding isn't required," Johnny replied. "Respect is." The lead fire dog approached me. I could feel the heat radiating from its body, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was warm and protective, like sitting by a fireplace on a cold night. The creature looked into my eyes with ancient intelligence, then breathed its warm, smoke-scented breath across my face. I felt something change inside me. Not just acceptance of what I was seeing, but a deeper knowledge. These mountains had their own laws, older than government and stronger than science. My job wasn't just to protect the wildlife and enforce park regulations. It was to guard the sacred places and keep the old agreements. "I understand," I said. The fire dog stepped back and looked at Johnny. He spoke a few more words in Cherokee. All 3 creatures began to fade like smoke and wind. becoming transparent and then disappearing entirely. The only sign they'd been there at all was the warm spots in the earth where their paws had rested. We flew back to headquarters that afternoon. I wrote my report very carefully. According to my official documentation, the livestock killings were the work of an unusually large pack of coyotes that had moved into the area from further north. The pack had been successfully relocated to a more remote part of the national forest. The case was closed. I never mentioned the fire breathing. I never mentioned the impossible heat or the creatures that looked like something from Cherokee legend. Mike agreed to keep the real story between us. Who would believe it anyway? But I made some changes. First, I convinced my supervisor to cancel the boundary survey project. I told him the Cherokee Tribal Council had raised concerns about the cultural significance of the area. That was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. The survey stakes were never replaced. Second, I started studying Cherokee history and language. I met with Johnny Crowfeather once a week to learn about the old stories and the sacred places throughout the park. Some of them weren't in any official records. Third, I created a new trail marking system. Using symbols that looked like standard wildlife warnings, I marked areas where hikers shouldn't go, not because of dangerous animals, but because some places in these mountains demand respect. Over the next few months, I discovered that Shenandoah wasn't the only park dealing with unusual wildlife encounters. Rangers from Great Smoky Mountains, Mammoth Cave, and other parks in the Appalachian system had their own stories. We started an informal network, sharing information about areas that required special protection. The government eventually developed an official protocol for what they called indigenous spiritual wildlife encounters. It's buried in paperwork so deep that most people never see it, but it exists. I've been working Devil's Backbone Ridge for 7 years now. Sometimes, on cold October nights when the moon is dark, I see red eyes watching from the tree line. But I'm not afraid anymore. They're not hunting me. They're making sure I'm doing my job. The fire dogs are still out there, sleeping beneath the mountain until someone disturbs the sacred places again. They trust me to make sure that doesn't happen. Last month, a mining company applied for permits to survey mineral rights along the ridge. The application was denied due to environmental concerns. They don't know how environmental those concerns really are. The mountains have their own laws, older than any government. My job is to make sure those laws are respected. Sometimes that means protecting people from the wildlife. Sometimes it means protecting the wildlife from people. And sometimes it means protecting ancient guardians that most people aren't ready to believe in. But they're real. I've seen them breathe fire and leave burning prints in solid rock. I've felt their impossible heat and looked into eyes that remember when the Cherokee first came to these mountains. They're still watching, still guarding, still keeping the old agreements. And as long as I'm a ranger in these mountains, I'll make sure they can keep sleeping in peace. The Devil's Backbone belongs to them. My name is Samuel Nightwalker, and I've spent 19 years tracking predators through these Virginia mountains. I'm telling you this because what happened last October changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I'm 44 years old, half Cherokee and half Scots-Irish, and before last fall, I would have laughed in your face if you'd mentioned werewolves. I'd tracked mountain lions that could take down a full-grown deer. I'd relocated black bears that broke into cabins. I'd studied predator behavior at Virginia Tech and worked with wildlife biologists across the Southeast. I knew animals. I understood how they thought, how they hunted, how they killed. Werewolves? That was campfire nonsense for tourists. The Mount Rogers area of Jefferson National Forest is my territory. It's beautiful country, high meadows where wild ponies graze, boulder fields that catch the morning sun, and rhododendron thickets so dense you can barely push through. It's also remote, 15 miles from the nearest road in some places. Cell phones don't work. When you're up there, you're alone with the mountains and whatever lives in them. October 1987 started normal enough. The leaves were turning gold and red. Early snow dusted the highest peaks. Hunters were coming in for deer season, and I was doing my usual patrols, checking on the wild pony herds and making sure everything stayed balanced. Then the calls started coming in. First, it was Jim Hastings, who ran cattle on the edge of the forest. He found 3 of his steers dead in the upper pasture. "Something tore them apart, Sam," he told me over the radio at the ranger station. His voice shook. "I've seen bear kills and cat kills. This ain't like anything I've ever seen." I drove out there that afternoon with my rifle and tracking kit. Jim met me at his fence line, looking pale and tired. He'd been up all night with his remaining cattle, afraid whatever killed the steers would come back. "They're up in the north pasture," he said. "I haven't touched anything." We walked up the hillside together. The October air was crisp and clean, smelling like fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Everything seemed peaceful, normal. Then I saw the first steer. Jim was right, this wasn't normal. The animal's throat had been torn out with massive force, but the bite pattern was wrong. I knelt down next to the body, examining the wounds carefully. I'd seen hundreds of predator kills. Bear bites are crushing, powerful, with wide spacing between the teeth. Mountain lion bites are precise, surgical, almost. Wolf bites, well, there weren't supposed to be wolves this far south. But I knew what they looked like from my training. This was different. The spacing suggested something with a mouth like a wolf's, but the individual tooth marks showed a pattern I'd only seen once before in human bite forensics during a workshop on poaching investigations. Canines, incisors, molars. Butt scaled. Up. Enlarged. Like someone had taken a human jaw and stretched it into something that could bite through a steer's neck. I didn't say anything to Jim. No point in spooking him worse than he already was. The other 2 steers showed the same pattern. Massive trauma to the throat, but the animals hadn't been eaten. A normal predator kills to eat. Bears will feed on a carcass for days. Mountain lions cache their kills and come back to them. Whatever did this killed for the sake of killing. I took photos and measurements, collected some hair samples from the wounds, and promised Jim I'd track down whatever was responsible. "You think it's a dog pack?" he asked as I was leaving. "Maybe fighting dogs someone let loose?" "Maybe," I said, though I didn't believe it. "I'll set up some trail cameras, see what we're dealing with." I spent the rest of that day setting up cameras around Jim's property and the nearby forest edge. I used my best equipment, infrared units that could capture footage in complete darkness. I placed them along game trails and near the kill sites, anywhere a predator might travel. Then I went home to my cabin and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. I spread the photos out on my kitchen table and studied them under lamplight. The bite marks bothered me. They bothered me a lot. I'd spent 2 decades learning to read predator sign like other people read newspapers, and this didn't fit anything in my experience. I called my friend Maria Chen, a wildlife biologist who worked out of the university. I described what I'd found without mentioning the weird details. "Could be a displaced wolf?" she said thoughtfully. "There have been reports of individuals wandering down from the north. Extremely rare, but possible. Or a hybrid wolf-dog crosses can be unpredictable. Would they kill without feeding?" She was quiet for a moment. "That's unusual. But if the animal was sick, rabid maybe, normal behavior goes out the window. Rabies." That made sense. A rabid predator would attack randomly, kill without eating, show no fear of humans or livestock. I held on to that explanation like a life raft. That night, I lay in bed listening to the wind move through the pine trees outside my window. The hunter's moon was rising, big and orange over the mountains. 3 days until it would be full. I should have been thinking about tracking strategies and trap placements. Instead, I kept seeing those bite marks in my mind, the way they looked almost human but impossibly large. Somewhere out in the darkness, something howled. It sounded like a wolf, but there was something else in that cry, something that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck, something that sounded almost like words. I checked the trail cameras 2 days later, on October 15th. The morning was cold and gray, with mist hanging in the valleys like smoke. I'd gotten another call the night before, more dead cattle, this time on the Patterson Ranch 5 miles west of Jim's place. I hiked out to my camera sites before heading to the new kill location. I wanted to see what I'd captured, if anything. The first 3 cameras showed normal traffic. Deer moving through at dawn and dusk, a black bear ambling past, probably looking for a last meal before denning up for winter, a bobcat hunting rabbits. The 4th camera made me stop walking. The screen showed nothing but static, complete white noise, like the camera was broken. But when I checked the unit, It was working perfectly. I scrolled through the footage. Normal video, normal video. Then suddenly at exactly 11:47 p.m. on October 13th, the image dissolved into static for 17 minutes. Then it came back, showing nothing but empty forest. The fifth camera showed the same thing, static from 11:43 p.m. to midnight. All 6 cameras in the area had the same glitch, all around the same time. I've worked with trail cameras for 15 years. They malfunction, sometimes batteries die, memory cards fail, moisture gets into the seals. But 6 cameras failing simultaneously for the exact same duration, that doesn't happen. I downloaded all the footage anyway, packed up my gear, and headed to the Patterson ranch. Ben Patterson was waiting for me at his barn, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He was a tough old man, ran his ranch alone since his wife died, didn't scare easily, but his hands shook as he poured coffee from a thermos. "It's bad, Sam," he said quietly. "Real bad." He wasn't exaggerating. 5 cattle dead this time. The kills were spread across his upper pasture in a pattern that looked deliberate, almost arranged. The animals formed a rough circle, their bodies pointing outward like the spokes of a wheel. The bite wounds matched the ones from Jim's place. Same impossible pattern, human-like teeth scaled up to predator size. But there was something new. Something that made my skin go cold, despite the warm morning sun. Claw marks. They scored the ground around each body, deep furrows in the earth that showed 4 toes and what looked like a thumb. The spacing was wrong for a bear. The shape was wrong for anything I'd ever seen. And they were high. Some of the marks on nearby trees were 8 feet off the ground, as if something had reared up on its hind legs and stretched upward. I took samples of everything. Hair caught on bark, blood from the wounds, casts of the prints. I worked methodically, professionally, doing everything by the book, but my hands weren't steady. Ben followed me around the pasture, talking nervously. "My grandfather used to tell stories," he said. "Old Cherokee stories about wolf people, shapeshifters. Said they hunted in these mountains long before white settlers came." "Those are just legends," I said automatically. "Yeah." Ben looked at the dead cattle, at the claw marks on the trees. "Yeah, I guess so." I set up more cameras and told Ben to keep his remaining cattle close to the barn, under lights at night. Then I headed back to my truck, needing to process what I'd found. That's when I noticed the fabric. It was caught on a blackberry bush, about 50 yards from the kill site, just a scrap, maybe 2 inches square. Denim, the kind you'd find on any pair of jeans. Mixed in with it were hairs. Some were coarse and gray, like wolf fur. Others were finer, darker, more like human hair. I bagged everything and sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the evidence bags on my passenger seat. There had to be a rational explanation. Someone training attack dogs, maybe, sick people who dressed up and trained animals to kill, some kind of illegal fighting ring, but that didn't explain the bite patterns, or the camera static, or the way my GPS unit kept drifting when I was near the kill sites, showing me in locations I wasn't actually in. I drove back to town and stopped at the Dollars Historical Society. Mary Whitehorse worked there. She was Cherokee Nation, kept detailed records of local history and tribal stories. If anyone knew about the legends Ben mentioned, it would be her. Wolf people? She looked at me curiously. "Why are you asking about the Nanahiwahia?" "Just curious. Investigating some livestock kills, and someone mentioned old stories." Mary studied me for a moment, then pulled out a thick binder. "The Nanahiwahia aren't like werewolf stories from Europe," she said. "In Cherokee tradition, they're people who violated sacred hunting laws. They killed for sport, or took more than they needed, or hunted in forbidden places. The spirits punished them by trapping them between human and wolf form. So they turn into wolves? During certain moon cycles, yes, but they keep their human intelligence. That makes them more dangerous than any normal wolf." She turned pages in the binder, showing me old drawings and handwritten accounts. The last reported case was in the 1952. A group of hunters who killed a white deer on sacred ground. They were found dead 3 months later, torn apart. "By what?" She looked at me steadily. "The official report said wild dogs. But my grandfather was there. He said those men were killed by what they'd become." I thanked her and left, my head spinning. Driving back to my cabin, I passed Jim Hastings' ranch. He was standing by his fence, and when he saw my truck, he flagged me down. Lost 2 more last night, he said. His face was gray. Sam, I'm thinking of just selling the rest and getting out. I can't afford to lose any more. Where were they killed? Up in the same pasture. But Sam, I had floodlights up there. Motion sensors. The lights never came on. Maybe the sensors malfunctioned. All 4 of them? Jim shook his head. My dog wouldn't go near the pasture this morning. Wouldn't even look up that way. Just whined and hid under the porch. I told him I'd check it out and drove on, but my mind was racing. Animals know things we don't. Dogs, especially. They can smell fear, sense danger, detect changes in the environment we can't perceive. If Jim's dog wouldn't go near that pasture, there was a reason. That night, I reviewed the camera footage on my laptop. Nothing unusual, just hours of empty forest. Then, at 2:47 a.m., on the newest footage, something appeared. It was only visible for 3 seconds before the camera glitched out again. But in those 3 seconds, I saw 5 shapes moving through the trees. They walked upright on 2 legs, but their silhouettes were wrong. Too large, shoulders too broad, heads the wrong shape. I played it back, frame by frame, enhanced the image as much as I could. In the clearest frame, one of the shapes turned toward the camera. The light from the infrared flash caught its eyes. They glowed pale green, reflecting the light like an animal's would. But the face was almost human. Almost. I closed my laptop and sat in the darkness of my cabin, listening to the forest outside. The full moon was tomorrow night. The hunter's moon. Some people called it the blood moon. And somewhere out in those mountains, 5 things that were neither fully human nor fully wolf were hunting. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, cleaning my rifle and trying to make a plan. By dawn, I'd decided to find Joseph Beartrack. Joseph was a Cherokee elder who lived in a small house on the edge of the reservation land. He was 83 years old, a Marine veteran, and one of the few people left who remembered the old ways. Mary Whitehorse had mentioned him, said he'd been there in the 1,950 seconds when the last incident happened. I found him sitting on his porch, smoking a pipe and watching the sunrise over the mountains. "You're the ranger," he said before I could introduce myself. "Samuel Nightwalker. Your grandmother was. Walks and Water's daughter." "Yes, sir, I need to ask you about something." "I know what you need to ask." He gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit down, boy. We don't have much time." I sat. Joseph puffed on his pipe for a moment, then spoke quietly. There were 5 of them in 1952. Young men from town who thought the old hunting laws didn't apply to them. They went up to the sacred grounds near Mount Rogers during the fall ceremonies. They killed a white doe, a spirit animal, and laughed about it. Took pictures with the body. What happened to them? The spirits cursed them, transformed them. During certain moon phases, they became what they'd hunted: wolves, but with human minds. Human rage, human desire for revenge. Joseph looked at me. They killed 17 people before they were stopped. How were they stopped? They weren't. Not permanently. Joseph's voice was heavy. The curse can't be broken by killing them. You'd just be murdering the human part. The only way to end it is through atonement. A ceremony that requires the cursed ones to willingly accept judgment. But that was 70 years ago. Those men would be dead by now. The curse passes down, Joseph said, to sons, grandsons. Anyone with the blood carries the burden. And during the blood moon, they have no choice. The wolf takes over completely. I felt sick. The blood moon is tonight. I know. I've been feeling it building for weeks. He stood up slowly, his old joints creaking. You came here for answers, Samuel. Now you have them. The question is, what will you do? I have to stop them. More people will die. You can't stop them, not with bullets. Not during the blood moon. Joseph went inside and came back with a small leather bag. But you can help them, if you're brave enough. Inside the bag were bundles of dried herbs, small carved stones, and 3 arrows with white feathers. My grandfather made these, Joseph said. Blessed them for hunting the cursed. They won't kill the human, can't kill the human. But they'll wound the wolf enough to bring it down. If we can perform the ceremony before the moon sets, we can end this. We? You think I'm too old? Joseph smiled grimly. I've been preparing for this for 70 years, boy. Ever since I watched my cousin turn into something that tried to kill me. We spent the morning preparing. Joseph taught me the words of the ceremony, explained the sacred pattern we'd need to create, showed me how to use the blessed arrows. It felt insane, like something from a movie, not real life. But I'd seen the evidence. The impossible bite marks. The footage of things that walked like men but weren't men. The way normal rules of nature didn't apply. Around noon, my radio crackled. It was the sheriff's dispatcher, voice tight with stress. "Sam, we need you at the Wilkins place. We need you now." The Wilkins family lived about 6 miles from the National Forest boundary. I'd known them for years. Good people, kept to themselves mostly. They ran a small Christmas tree farm and raised goats. When I arrived, there were 3 sheriff's vehicles and an ambulance. Deputy Carter met me at the end of the driveway, looking shaken. "Don't let the kids see," he said quietly. The parents were dead, killed in their barn sometime around dawn. The attack was vicious, brutal, blood everywhere, the same bite patterns I'd been seeing for days. But the sheriff was focused on something else. He showed me a trail of paw prints leading away from the barn. They started as clear wolf tracks, massive, larger than any normal wolf. But about 50 yards from the barn, they started to change. The front paws became more like hands. The hind paws flattened, elongated. The stride changed from 4-legged to 2-legged. By the time the tracks reached the tree line, they were human footprints. Bare feet, but human. "What, in God's name, are we dealing with?" the sheriff asked me. I couldn't answer. Joseph's warnings echoed in my head. Asterisk. During the blood moon, they have no choice. The wolf takes over completely. Asterisk. If they'd already lost control before moonrise, tonight was going to be catastrophic. I spent the afternoon coordinating with the sheriff's department. We set up a perimeter around the forest access points, warned nearby residents to stay inside, contacted state wildlife officers for backup. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. You can't fight a curse with roadblocks and rifles. As sunset approached, I met Joseph at a clearing near the center of the attack zone. It was a beautiful spot, a high meadow surrounded by old-growth forest, with a clear view of the eastern sky where the moon would rise. "This is where it happened in 1952, Joseph said, "where they killed the white doe. The ground remembers. We prepared the ceremony space, arranging stones in a sacred pattern, burning, herbs that made my eyes water." Joseph chanted in Cherokee, words I didn't fully understand but could feel in my bones. The moon rose just after 7 p.m. It came up huge and red, a true blood moon, colored by some atmospheric trick that made it look like it was bleeding into the sky. And from the forest around us, 5 voices howled in unison. They came from all directions at once, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I caught glimpses through the trees, massive shapes, walking upright, with heads like wolves and hands that ended in claws. Joseph kept chanting, his voice steady despite the terror in his eyes. I knocked one of the blessed arrows, my hands surprisingly calm. The first one burst into the clearing from the north. It was huge, 7 feet tall at least, covered in gray-brown fur, with a wolf's head on a body that stood like a man's. Its eyes were intelligent, aware. It looked right at me, and I saw recognition there. Hatred. It knew. I was trying to end its existence. Joseph's chanting reached a crescendo. The stones around us began to glow faintly, pulsing with each word he spoke. The werewolf charged. I fired. The blessed arrow took it in the shoulder. The creature screamed a sound that was half wolf howl, half human agony, and stumbled. Blue-white light spread from the wound, not burning it but holding it somehow, pinning it in place. Then the other 4 arrived. What happened next was chaos. They came at us from every direction, moving with pack coordination that was terrifyingly intelligent. One would feint from the east, while another attacked from the west. They used the terrain, the trees, working together like soldiers, executing a battle plan, because they were soldiers. Or had been. Once, during their human hours, these 5 individuals were members of our community. They coached Little League, and served on the town council, and sang in church choirs. But their ancestors had violated sacred laws, and the curse had passed down through generations, waiting for the blood moon to awaken it. Joseph kept chanting, maintaining the ceremony even as one of the creatures circled behind him. I fired my second arrow, catching it in the leg. It went down howling, the blessed weapon doing what normal bullets couldn't, injuring the supernatural without killing the human underneath. But I only had one arrow left. The largest werewolf, the alpha, stood at the edge of the clearing, watching us. It was bigger than the others, its fur almost black, with scars across its muzzle that spoke of old battles. When it looked at me, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I knew those eyes. Even transformed, even monstrous, I recognized them. Thomas Redfield, the high school principal, a man I'd had coffee with a dozen times, who'd helped organize the town's 4th of July celebration last summer, who'd told me about his granddaughter's college applications. Tom was the alpha, had been for 30 years, ever since his father died and the curse fully claimed him. "Tom," I said quietly, "I know you're in there. I know you can hear me." The werewolf's ears flicked. Its eyes narrowed. "We're trying to help. The ceremony can break the curse. You can be free." For a moment, something flickered in those eyes, something human struggling against the wolf. Tom's human mind, trapped inside a monster's body, fighting for control. Then the moon climbed higher, becoming brighter, and the wolf won. Tom charged. I fired my last arrow. It caught him in the chest, but he was so massive, so powerful, that he kept coming. He hit me like a freight train, knocking me backward. I felt his breath on my face, hot, smelling of blood and wet fur. His jaws opened. I could see every tooth, each one as long as my finger. Then, Joseph's chanting changed. The words became urgent, commanding. The stones around us blazed with light so bright it hurt to look at. Tom howled in pain and reared back. The other werewolves were howling too, writhing where the blessed arrows had pinned them. The light spread from the stones to them, covering their bodies in that same blue-white glow. They must choose. Joseph shouted over the noise. The cursed must surrender willingly. I can open the door, but they must walk through it. Tom stood over me, shaking his massive head. The light was burning him. I could see it, see him struggling against it. The wolf wanted to kill me. Every instinct, every predatory drive was screaming at him to tear me apart. But underneath the wolf, Tom was fighting. I locked eyes with him. "You have grandchildren," I said. "Sarah just got accepted to Virginia Tech. You told me about it. You were so proud." The werewolf snarled, but didn't attack. "You don't want to be this. You've been fighting it your whole life. I've seen you, Tom. How you always look tired. How you flinch away from talking about the full moon. How you make excuses to leave town during certain weeks." The light from Joseph's ceremony was growing stronger. I could see it spreading through the forest now, revealing other shapes in the darkness. Spirits, maybe, or echoes of the white doe that had been killed here 70 years ago, waiting for justice. "Let it go," I whispered. "It's not your fault. It was never your fault. But you can end it." Tom closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were filled with tears, impossible tears from a monster's eyes. Then he howled, not a hunting cry, but something else. Something that sounded like grief and relief and surrender all mixed together. The other four answered him. One by one, they stopped fighting the light and let it cover them completely. Joseph's chanting reached a peak. The stones exploded with brilliance. The whole clearing became as bright as noon. And the werewolves began to change. It wasn't like the transformation I'd imagined. No Hollywood special effects, no dramatic reshaping. Instead, they just diminished. The wolf fell away like a shadow dispelled by light, and what remained were 5 naked, shivering people lying in the grass. Tom was closest to me. He looked old now, older than he should, as if the curse had been holding back decades of aging. His chest had a wound where my arrow struck, but it was already closing, healing as the curse released him. "Sam," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, damaged from howling. "Thank you." Joseph finished the ceremony and collapsed. I caught him before he hit the ground. "Is it done?" I asked. "It's done." He was exhausted, barely conscious. "The debt is paid. The spirits are satisfied." The 5 former werewolves helped each other up. They were dazed, confused, but human, fully human. The blood moon still hung in the sky, but it had no power over them anymore. I used my radio to call for help ambulances. The sheriff, blankets, and clothes for 5 people who'd been missing from town for hours with no memory of where they'd been. Because that was the story we'd tell. Amnesia from trauma, mass confusion, anything but the truth. Some things people aren't ready to understand. The official report blamed the livestock deaths on a pack of rabid feral dogs. We found evidence to support it, planted evidence, I admit, but necessary. The dogs were destroyed in the forest. Their bodies never recovered because they were never real. The Wilkins family's deaths were listed as a tragic animal attack. The insurance paid out. The family got buried in the town cemetery with a good turnout. And 5 people who'd been cursed for sins they didn't commit got to live normal lives. Tom Redfield retired from his principal job, citing health concerns. He spends most of his time with his grandkids now. Sometimes I see him at the diner, and we have coffee like we always did. But his eyes are different now, lighter, free of the shadow that always lurked behind them. The other 4, Linda Walsh, Marcus Prentice, Sarah Crow, and David Hampton, all found ways to rebuild their lives. They don't talk about what happened, what they were. But once a month, they meet at Joseph Beartrack's house. I'm invited to these gatherings, though I don't always go. Joseph calls them healing circles. They help each other deal with the memories of things they did while transformed. People they hurt, lines they crossed. It's not easy. Freedom from the curse doesn't erase the past. As for me, I've stayed on as a ranger, but with a new understanding of what these mountains hold. There are old places here, sacred places where the normal rules don't quite apply. The Cherokee knew it. My grandmother's people knew it. Now I know it too. I work with Joseph and the Cherokee Nation's spiritual authorities now, helping identify and protect sacred sites within the national forest. The Park Service thinks I've just developed an interest in cultural preservation. They don't know I'm watching for signs, because the curse that claimed Tom and the others started with a violation hunters who killed without respect, who took what was sacred and treated it like a trophy. As long as people enter these mountains without understanding what they're walking on, there's always a risk. 3 months after the blood moon, I found white deer tracks near Mount Rogers. Not a full-grown doe, but a fawn. Young, innocent, unaware of what hunters might do if they found it. I patrol that area now more than anywhere else. I've installed cameras, set up motion sensors, established it as a restricted zone. Anyone who tries to hunt there will have to go through me first. Sometimes, late at night when I'm up in the high country, I hear howling. It's just regular wolves. A few have started migrating back into the area naturally. Or coyotes, or wild dogs, probably. But I always pay attention, because I learned something that October that most people never have to face. The line between human and monster is thinner than we want to believe. We're all capable of becoming something we never intended, especially when we ignore the old warnings and sacred laws. The blood moon will rise again next October. It rises every year. Most people will just think it's beautiful, a romantic sight to photograph and share online. I'll be in the mountains that night, watching, waiting, ready, because some curses are older than our understanding. And some guardians have to stand watch in places where science and spirit overlap, where the civilized world brushes against something ancient and wild. My name is Samuel Nightwalker, and I'm a ranger in the Jefferson National Forest. But I'm also something else now. I'm a keeper of secrets, a bridge between worlds, a witness to the fact that some legends are warnings, not stories. And I'll never dismiss the old ways again. My name is Frank Ironwood, and I don't believe in ghosts. Let me say that again, because it matters. I don't believe in ghosts. I've worked in these Kentucky mountains for 14 years as a forest ranger, and before that, I spent 12 years as a logger, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. I've seen just about everything these woods can throw at a man: bears, flash floods, poachers with more bullets than sense. But ghosts? That's just stories old-timers tell to keep kids from wandering off at night. The hills around Daniel Boone National Forest tell a lot of stories. Most of them aren't true. It's September 1966, and the trees are just starting to turn. I'm standing at the ranger station, looking at a report that doesn't make a lick of sense. 2 hikers came in yesterday morning, white as sheets, saying they heard chainsaws running in the old-growth section of Panther Creek. Problem is, that whole area is protected. Nobody's allowed to cut there. The bigger problem, they heard it at 2 in the morning. Probably just poachers, my supervisor says, handing me the file. "Check it out. Document anything you find, and we'll get the sheriff involved if needed." I nod and grab my gear. Camera, compass, climbing rope, my good boots. The walk to Panther Creek takes about 3 hours from the nearest logging road. It's steep country, the kind where one wrong step can send you tumbling 50 feet down a rocky slope. The canopy up there is so thick that radio signals can't get through. You're on your own once you head in. I grew up in these mountains. My granddad taught me to read the forest like a book. Which trees are healthy, which ones are dying, where the deer trails run, how to spot a good cutting area from a bad one. That's why I switched from logging to protecting the forest. I saw too many companies come in, take what they wanted, and leave the land torn up and bleeding. Landslides, poisoned streams, hills so cut up they looked like a dog with mange. The old-growth section near Panther Creek is special. Those trees have been standing for 200 years, maybe more. Massive oaks and poplars, the kind you don't see much anymore. The Forest Service bought the land back in the 1952 to keep it safe. Every tree there is numbered and tracked. As I hike up the ridge, I'm thinking about how to catch whoever's cutting illegally. Most poachers are smart. They work during hunting season when there's lots of noise to cover them, or they truck the logs out at night. But running chainsaws at 2 a.m.? That's just stupid. The sound carries for miles in the quiet. The forest feels normal as I climb higher, birds singing, squirrels chattering, the usual September sounds. I've walked this path 100 times, and nothing seems off, until I reach the old-growth section. The first thing I notice is the smell. Fresh cut wood, sharp and clean. Then I see the stumps, 3 of them. Big oaks, that must have been 4 feet across. The cuts are recent sap still sticky, wood still pale and bright. I kneel down next to one stump, running my hand across the cut surface. Something's wrong here, but it takes me a minute to figure out what. The cut marks are all wrong. I've been around logging my whole life. I know what a chainsaw cut looks like, smooth and straight, with little grooves from the chain teeth. This looks like it was cut with an old crosscut saw, the kind my granddad used back in the 20s. The marks are wider, deeper, less even. But that doesn't make sense. Nobody uses crosscut saws anymore. They're museum pieces. I stand up and look around. Here's the really weird part. There's no sawdust. When you cut down a tree, especially one this big, you end up with piles of sawdust and wood chips. It goes everywhere. But the ground around these stumps is clean. Just some dried leaves and moss. No sawdust. No wood chips. No drag marks where they hauled the logs away. I check for tire tracks, footprints, anything. The ground is soft from last week's rain, perfect for tracks. But there's nothing. It's like the trees just disappeared. I pull out my camera and start taking pictures. The Forest Service will want documentation. As I'm lining up a shot of the biggest stump, my camera makes a weird clicking sound and stops working. I check the film, it's jammed somehow. That's never happened before. Great, I mutter, fiddling with the camera. I give up after a minute and make some notes in my field book instead. 3 oaks, approximately 45 to 50 inches diameter, cut with unknown method, no evidence of removal. The sun is getting lower. I've got maybe 2 hours of good light left. I decide to set up a camp nearby and watch the area overnight. If someone's coming back to work, I'll catch them in the act. I find a good spot on the ridge above the cut trees, hidden behind some laurel bushes. From here, I can see the whole area without being seen. I eat a cold sandwich and wait for dark. As the light fades, the forest gets quiet. Too quiet. The evening birds stop singing, the insects go silent. Even the wind seems to die down. That's when I start to feel it, a coldness that doesn't match the warm September air, a feeling like someone's watching me. I tell myself I'm being stupid. It's just the woods at night. I've done this 100 times. But something feels different about Panther Creek tonight. Something feels very wrong. I've been sitting in the dark for 3 hours when I hear the first sound. It's faint at first, so faint I think I'm imagining it. A rhythmic noise, like singing? No, chanting. Men's voices, low and rough, keeping time with something. Then I hear it clearly, the sound of a saw biting into wood. I ease forward, careful not to make noise. The sounds are coming from down in the hollow, right where those 3 stumps are. But here's the thing. I can see that area from my hiding spot. There's a half moon tonight, enough light to make out shapes and movement. The hollow is empty. Nobody there. But the sounds keep coming. Not chainsaw sounds, the slow, steady rhythm of a crosscut saw, pulled back and forth by two men. I know that sound from when I was a kid, watching my granddad work. It's unmistakable. I rub my eyes, thinking maybe I'm more tired than I realized. But when I look again, I see them. At first they're just shadows, darker spots in the darkness. Then they start to get clearer, like someone slowly turning up a light. 6, no, 7 men, wearing old work clothes. Suspenders, cloth caps, heavy boots. They're gathered around a massive oak tree, and two of them are working a long cross-cut saw through its trunk. The men are glowing. Not bright, just a faint shimmer, like moonlight on water. I can see right through them to the trees behind. My heart is hammering so hard I think they might hear it. This isn't real. It can't be real. I'm hallucinating. Maybe someone spiked my water. Maybe I hit my head on the hike up and don't remember. But the sounds are real. The grinding of the saw, the men calling out timing, heave, ho, the creak and groan of the tree starting to give way. One of the men, bigger than the others, wearing a foreman's hat, shouts something I can't quite hear. The sawyers speed up their rhythm. Other men position themselves with ropes and poles, getting ready to guide the tree's fall. I'm watching ghosts cut down a tree. The word sounds crazy even in my head, but what else can I call them? These men aren't alive. They can't be. You don't glow when you're alive. You don't appear out of nowhere in a protected forest at midnight. The tree starts to fall. I hear the wood splitting, that sharp crack that means it's going. The men scatter back, all except one. A younger guy, maybe 20, who doesn't move fast enough. The tree comes down right on top of him. I actually cry out when it happens, a short sound I can't hold back, but the ghosts don't notice. They're all running to the fallen man, trying to lift the tree off him. And here's the really horrible part. I can hear him screaming. It's distant, echoing, like listening to someone yell from the bottom of a well. But it's real screaming, full of pain and terror. The foreman is shouting orders. The men are heaving at the tree trunk, trying to roll it. The young guy's screams get weaker, then stop. Then, all at once, the ghosts disappear. Just gone. Like someone flipped a switch. The hollow is empty and silent again. No men. No fallen tree. Just the three stumps from earlier and the standing trees all around them. I sit there shaking for a long time. My hands are trembling so bad I can't write notes. My breath is coming too fast. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. But my brain is refusing to accept it. Finally, as the sky starts to get gray with approaching dawn, I climb down from my hiding spot. My legs feel weak, unsteady. I make my way to where the tree fell on that young man. There's nothing there, no tree, no body, no disturbed ground. But when I kneel down and look close, I find something. A lunch pail, the old-fashioned metal kind with a handle on top. It's rusted almost completely through, like it's been sitting outside for 40 years. But when I carefully open it, the sandwich inside looks fresh. White bread, some kind of meat, an apple that's barely starting to brown. I drop it like it burned me. The sun's coming up now. The forest is waking up, birds starting to sing, insects buzzing, everything returning to normal. But I can't shake the cold feeling in my gut. I make my way back down the mountain, practically running. I need to talk to someone. I need to know I'm not crazy. Back at the ranger station, I tell my supervisor everything. He listens with a patient expression, the kind you use with someone who might be losing it. "Frank," he says carefully, "you've been working hard. Maybe you fell asleep up there and had a dream?" "I didn't dream that lunch pail," I say. "It's in my pack right now." He looks uncomfortable. "Okay, but ghosts? Come on. There's got to be an explanation." I can see he doesn't believe me. Hell, I barely believe me. But I know what I saw. That afternoon, I drive to the town library and ask about Panther Creek's history. The librarian, Mrs. Henderson, is old enough to remember the stories her parents told. When I mention the area near the old-growth section, her face goes pale. "That's where the Blackburn crew died," she says quietly. 23 men. It was September 1923. They were logging that ridge, cutting trees way too fast, and the whole hillside came down on them. My grandfather helped dig out the bodies. She brings me newspaper clippings from 1923. The photos are grainy, but clear enough. Men in work clothes. The same style I saw last night. The foreman's name was William Blackburn. The article says the logging company was pushing them to meet an impossible quota, forcing them to cut on slopes that weren't safe. They say, Mrs. Henderson hesitates. They say the company never paid the families what they were owed. The men weren't even buried proper, just dumped in a mass grave, no markers. The company folded up a month later and disappeared. I study the photo of the crew. There, in the back row, the young man who got crushed by the tree. The article lists him as James Sullivan, age 19. Are there still stories, I ask, about that area? Oh, sure. Folks claim they hear sawing sounds at night. Loggers in the 60s said they'd find trees cut down that weren't there the day before. Most people just stay away. I thank her and drive back up the mountain. It's late afternoon by the time I reach Panther Creek. I need to see this in daylight, need to prove to myself. I'm not crazy, the 3 stumps are still there, but when I compare them to my notes from yesterday, something's impossible. The stumps are older. The cut surfaces that were pale and fresh 24 hours ago are now weathered gray. The sap has dried and darkened. These cuts look like they're weeks old, not one day. I take out my measuring tape and check the rings. These trees were cut in. I count carefully. 1,923. The rings don't lie. But I saw these stumps yesterday with fresh cuts. I'm still staring at them when I hear voices. Not ghost voices, this time living ones. 2 men coming up the trail, talking loud enough to scare off any game for miles. Poachers, probably. I step behind a tree and wait to see what they're up to. They emerge into the clearing and stop cold when they see the stumps. What the hell, one of them says. He's carrying a chainsaw, the other has marking paint. Definitely poachers, planning to cut illegally. Someone beat us here, the second man says. These cuts are fresh. Fresh? The first man kneels by a stump. Charlie, these cuts are ancient. Look at the weathering. They argue for a minute, then decide to cut a different tree. The first man pulls the starter on his chainsaw. It coughs but doesn't start. He tries again. Nothing. Goddamn piece of junk. He checks the spark plug, the fuel line. Everything looks fine, but the chainsaw won't start. The second man tries his marking paint. He shakes the can, sprays, and nothing comes out. He checks the nozzle, shakes it harder. Still nothing. Forget it, the first man says. There's something in his voice I recognize. Fear. Let's get out of here. They leave fast, practically running back down the trail. Their equipment works fine outside the old growth section. I can hear the chainsaw roar to life about half a mile away. I wait until dark. I have to see them again. I have to understand what's happening. They appear at midnight, just like before. 7 men, translucent and glowing faintly, the same crew. They're cutting a different tree this time, another massive oak. I watch as they work, and this time I notice details I missed before. They're not talking to each other. They're working in complete silence, except for the saw sounds. Their movements are mechanical, repetitive, like they're following a script they've performed 1,000 times. The foreman Blackburn, according to the newspaper, looks more solid than the others. And he's watching. Not the tree they're cutting, but the surrounding forest, like he's searching for something. His eyes pass right over my hiding spot, and even though he can't possibly see me, I feel pinned by that gaze. Then he speaks, and his voice is different from the others, less echoey, more real. We're behind quota, he says. Keep moving. The company's breathing down my neck. The crew works faster, too fast. I see them making mistakes, not checking their 90 angles, not clearing escape routes, not watching for widowmakers in the branches above. All the basic safety rules my granddad taught me, they're ignoring them. I realize with a chill that they're not trying to be safe. They're trying to meet a quota. They're doing exactly what they did in 1923, the work that killed them. And it's causing real damage. The tree they're cutting now, I can see it starting to fall. When it comes down, it's going to hit 3 other trees, knocking them into each other. On a slope this steep, that could start a chain reaction, just like the landslide that killed them. Stop, I shout before I can think better of it. The slope's not stable. Every ghost freezes. 7 pairs of dead eyes turn to look at me. Then Blackburn's face changes. He looks confused, then angry. "Who the hell are you?" he demands. "This is a company operation. Get off our site." "Your operation happened 43 years ago," I say, my voice shaking. "You're dead. All of you are dead." The younger man, James Sullivan, looks down at his hands, looks at the other men. For a moment, confusion crosses his translucent face. Then Blackburn shouts, "Back to work. We've got quota to meet." The spell breaks. The men return to their sawing like nothing happened, like I'm not even there. I watch helplessly as the tree falls exactly where I predicted. It hits two others, and I hear the deep groan of stressed wood. Rocks start sliding down the slope. Then, like before, they all vanish. I stand there in the dark, watching small rocks still tumbling down the hillside. They're going to cause another landslide. These ghosts are trapped in a loop, repeating the same dangerous work that killed them. And when they finally recreate the conditions that brought down the whole slope, it's going to bury the valley below where a dozen families live now. I have to stop them. But how do you stop ghosts? I spend the next day preparing. If the ghost crew won't listen to reason, maybe I can reach them another way. I drive to 3 different libraries, reading everything I can about the 1923 disaster. The more I learn, the angrier I get. The logging company, Appalachian Timber Associates, knew the slopes were unstable. Engineers told them not to cut there. But the company was behind on a contract, desperate to deliver lumber on time. They pressured Blackburn's crew to work faster, cut more, ignore safety rules. When the landslide hit, killing all 23 men, the company claimed it was the crew's fault, said they'd been reckless, ignored warnings. The truth got buried with the men. I find one more thing: the original work orders. The crew was supposed to cut 50,000 board feet in 2 weeks, an impossible quota for that terrain. They'd cut 43,000 feet when the hillside collapsed. They'd been 7,000 feet short. That night, I'm back on the ridge at midnight. I've brought my climbing gear, a good rope, and something else, my own crosscut saw, an antique I inherited from my granddad. If the ghosts are stuck using old tools, maybe old tools are how I reach them. They appear on schedule. This time, I don't hide. I walk right into the clearing, carrying the crosscut saw. Blackburn sees me first. His translucent face twists with anger. "I told you to get off our site." "Mr. Blackburn," I say, keeping my voice steady, "I'm a logger. 3rd generation. I know you're trying to meet quota." That stops him. He stares at me, and for the first time, I see something besides anger in his face. Desperation. "We're short," he says. "The company needs those board feet. If we don't deliver, the company's gone," I tell him gently. "It folded in 1923. You don't owe them anything." "That's not." He looks confused. "What year is it?" 1966. The other men are gathering around now, listening. James Sullivan, the young one, speaks up. "How long have we been cutting?" 43 years, I say. The words hit them like a physical blow. Several of the men stagger. One sits down heavily, his translucent form flickering. "We died," another man says slowly. "The hillside came down. I remember now. The trees were falling, the ground was moving, and then, but we have to finish." Blackburn interrupts desperately. "The quota. The company is counting on us. Our families need the money." "Your families are gone," I say. "Your kids are old men now. Your wives remarried or died. Everyone you were working for is gone. You're free. You can rest." "No," Blackburn's voice cracks. "We have to finish. That's what you do. You finish the job. You meet the quota. He falters, and I see tears on his translucent face. "We can't stop," he whispers. "We've tried. God, we've tried. But every night we come back, and we have to cut. We have to keep cutting until we meet that goddamn quota." Understanding hits me. They're not choosing to do this. They're trapped, bound by an obligation they couldn't fulfill in life. The company's greed and their own sense of duty have become a prison. "Then, let me help you finish," I say. I hold up the crosscut saw. "You need 7,000 more board feet, right? Let me help you cut it, but we do it my way, safe and smart, on stable ground. No more cutting on these slopes." Blackburn shakes his head. "The trees the company needs are up here. The big ones. The company's dead, I shout. It doesn't matter where the trees come from. What matters is the board feet. Let me help you get those numbers, and then you can rest. The men look at each other. James Sullivan steps forward. I'm tired, he says quietly. I'm so tired of cutting. If there's a way to stop, there might be, I say. But we have to do it together. Blackburn struggles with himself. I can see the conflict on his face, years of taking orders, of duty and obligation, fighting against the desperate need to be free. Finally, he nods. Show us, he says. I lead them to a section of forest down the slope, where the ground is stable and the trees are marked for thinning anyway. Trees that need to come out to help the forest grow healthier. These ones, I say. They're good timber, and cutting them won't hurt anything. I position the cross-cut saw on the first tree. To my shock, when I gesture to James Sullivan to take the other handle, he can actually grip it. His ghostly hands solidify enough to hold the wooden handles. Together, I say, nice and steady. Heave. Ho. Heave. Ho. We cut through the first tree, and it falls clean and safe. The other ghost loggers watch, then join in. Some handle ropes, others mark the logs, a few work on limbing the fallen trees. We fall into a rhythm, living man and dead men working side by side. It should be impossible, but it works. The ghosts can interact with tools I'm touching, can move logs, I've started rolling. It's like my being alive gives them temporary solidity. We work through the night. As dawn approaches, we've cut 10 trees, good timber, carefully harvested. How much? Blackburn asks breathlessly. I do the math. About 5,000 board feet. We're getting close. But as I say it, something changes in the air. It grows colder. The ghosts all turn to look at something behind me. I turn and see another figure materializing. This one is different, solid-looking, wearing a suit and tie, carrying a clipboard. His face is hard and mean. What the hell is going on here? He demands. Blackburn, why are you cutting down here? The valuable timber is up on the ridge. Get back up there now. It's a company supervisor. Another ghost, but one that doesn't look desperate or tired. He looks angry. Mr. Kincaid, Blackburn says, and his voice has gone small. We thought, I don't pay you to think. Kincaid snarls. I pay you to cut where I tell you to cut. Get back up that ridge, or you're all fired. The ghost loggers are shrinking back, falling into old patterns of obedience. I see the trap now. It's not just the quota holding them. It's him. This supervisor's ghost, still demanding, still controlling. No, I say, stepping between Kincaid and the crew. These men don't work for you anymore. Who the hell are you? I'm the ranger who's going to make sure you never hurt another worker. I turn to the crew. He can't fire you. He can't do anything to you. He's just a ghost like you, and he's got no power anymore. Get out of my way, Kincaid growls, moving toward me. His hand reaches out and passes right through my chest. He stares at his hand in confusion. He's got no substance. He's just anger and greed with no real power. You're done, I tell him. These men are finishing their work the right way, and then they're free, and there's nothing you can do about it. I turn my back on him, the ultimate dismissal. Come on, I tell the crew, we've got 2,000 more feet to cut. Let's finish this. The men hesitate, then James Sullivan grins, the first real expression I've seen on any of them. Hell yes, he says, and picks up his tools. The others follow. We work as Kincaid screams and threatens, but his voice gets fainter and fainter until it fades to nothing. The ghost supervisor disappears like smoke. We cut 3 more trees as the sun rises. When I do the final calculation, we're at 50,200 board feet. That's it, I say. You did it. You met quota. The change is immediate. The ghost loggers start to glow brighter, their forms becoming more solid and real-looking. They look at each other in wonder. I can feel the sun, one man says, lifting his face to the dawn light. The weight's gone, another says. The weight on my chest, it's gone. Blackburn walks over to me. He's fully solid now, looking like a living man. He extends his hand, and when I shake it, his grip is warm and firm. Thank you, he says simply, for seeing us, for helping us. What happens now? I ask. He looks at his crew and smiles. Now we rest. One by one, the men fade. Not disappearing, walking away, into a light I can't quite see, heading towards something beyond. James Sullivan waves at me before he goes. Blackburn is the last. Before he fades, he says, "Take care of these woods. They're worth protecting." "I will, I promise." Then he's gone, and I'm alone in the forest as the sun rises over the ridge. It's been 3 months since that night. The old growth section is quiet now, normal quiet, with birds and wind and the usual forest sounds. No more phantom sawing echoing through the darkness. I filed my report, though I left out the ghost part. Just said I investigated illegal logging, found evidence of old activity, and determined the area was secure. My supervisor seemed relieved to close the case. But I go back to Panther Creek, every few weeks, checking on the forest. The trees I cut with the ghost crew are still there, lying where they fell. I don't have it in me to mill them or haul them out. They're a memorial of sorts. I did one more thing. I tracked down the old mass grave where the logging crew was buried, an unmarked patch of ground behind a Methodist church in the next county. I paid for a proper headstone out of my own pocket. It lists all 23 names and says, "These men died doing honest work. May they rest in peace." On the day the stone was unveiled, I could have sworn I heard voices singing an old hymn in the distance, but when I turned to look, there was no one there. I learned something from William Blackburn and his crew. Sometimes people get trapped not just in death, but in life. Trapped by obligations, by other people's demands, by trying to meet impossible standards. The ghost loggers couldn't escape even after dying because they'd never learned to say no, to stand up, to the company that was killing them. I think about that when I'm working now. When someone tells me to cut corners, to ignore safety rules, to push too hard, I think about 23 men who couldn't say no. And I make damn sure I can. Last week, a group of hikers reported hearing singing near Panther Creek. Not scary singing a work song, cheerful and rhythmic, like men who are happy with their labor. I went up to investigate but found nothing unusual. Sometimes at night, when I'm lying in bed, I think I hear that crosscut saw rhythm, heave, ho, but it's not frightening anymore. It's peaceful, like the sound of work being done right, by men who are finally free to do it their own way. I still don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in debts that need paying. I believe in justice for workers who got cheated. I believe some places remember the people who died there, and sometimes, just sometimes, those people need help before they can let go. The Forest Service is talking about naming that section of Panther Creek after the logging crew. The Blackburn Grove, they're calling it. A memorial forest where the trees grow tall and strong, protected forever. I think William Blackburn would like that. Sometimes, on my patrols through those woods, I find things that shouldn't be there. An old lunch pail carefully placed on a stump, a rusted saw blade hung from a tree branch, tools from another era, arranged like offerings. I leave them where they are. They're not hurting anything. And once, just once, I saw him. Blackburn, standing at the edge of the old growth section in full daylight. He was solid, real-looking, wearing clean work clothes and a peaceful expression. When he saw me, he tipped his hat and smiled. Then he turned and walked into the forest, fading with each step until he was gone. I think he was saying goodbye. Or maybe he was saying thank you. Either way, the phantom loggers of Panther Creek have finally gone home. And the forest they died in is safe now, growing strong and wild like it was meant to. Some debts are paid with more than money. These mountains remember every worker who died for profit. And sometimes, if you listen close on a quiet night, you can still hear them not crying or haunting, but singing. Singing the old songs of honest work, finally done right. The woods take care of their own. And now, so do I. My name is Catherine Ravencrest, and I've been a park ranger for 10 years. People always ask about my last name. Yes, it's real. And yes, my Cherokee grandmother picked it when she married my grandfather. She said ravens watch over the dead, and our family should too. I work in the George Washington National Forest in West Virginia, protecting archaeological sites from treasure hunters and vandals. Most people think it's boring work, but I love it. Every cave painting and pottery shard tells a story about the people who lived here long before us. November is always busy in these mountains. Hunting season brings people deep into the woods, and they find things they shouldn't touch. Ancient burial sites, mostly. My job is to document everything and keep the curious away. That's how I ended up in Bone Valley. The name should have been a warning, but I'd heard worse. Half the places in these mountains have scary names: Devil's Backbone, Haunted Ridge, Witch's Hollow. Local. Folk love their ghost stories. Bone Valley sits 12 miles from the nearest marked trail, hidden in a maze of limestone caves and sinkholes. The Cherokee called it sacred ground, a place where the dead went to rest. Even today, tribal members won't go there. I used to think that was just superstition. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in late November. 2 hunters had found bodies in Bone Valley, artifact hunters who'd been reported missing 3 days earlier. The sheriff wanted me to document any damage to the archaeological sites before his people trampled all over everything. I packed my usual gear: GPS, cameras, ground-penetrating radar, and my cave exploration equipment. The Cherokee sites in that area were some of the oldest in the state, and illegal digging had been a problem for years. The hike took 4 hours through thick woods carpeted with dead leaves. Every step crunched loudly, making it impossible to move quietly. The temperature dropped as I got deeper into the valley, which was normal for November, but this felt different, sharper, like the air itself had teeth. I found the sheriff's deputies standing around looking sick. 2 men in their 30s lay on the ground near a limestone cave entrance. They were fully clothed, with their expensive metal detectors and digging tools scattered nearby. But something was wrong with the bodies. Medical examiner's on his way, Deputy Morrison told me. He was pale and kept glancing at the corpses like they might move. Never seen anything like this. I'd seen plenty of dead bodies in my work: bear attacks, hunting accidents, exposure. This was different. The men looked empty, not decomposed or damaged, just hollow, like someone had carefully removed something vital from inside them. Any idea what killed them? I asked. Morrison shook his head. No wounds, no blood, they just look deflated. I knelt next to the first body, trying to be professional. The man's face was peaceful, eyes closed like he was sleeping. But when I touched his arm, something felt wrong. Too soft, too flexible. Have you moved them at all? Just checked for pulse when we found them. Haven't touched them since. I looked closer at the cave entrance behind the bodies. Fresh tool marks scarred the limestone around the opening, and broken pottery shards lay scattered on the ground. These weren't random hunters, they'd been specifically looking for Cherokee artifacts. Did they get inside the cave? I asked. Don't know. We were waiting for you before we went in. I stood up and checked my equipment. The GPS was acting strange, showing coordinates that shifted every few seconds. The ground-penetrating radar displayed impossible readings, vast hollow spaces that shouldn't exist in solid rock. Something was very wrong in Bone Valley. I decided to examine the cave entrance before the medical examiner arrived. The tool marks were fresh, probably made in the last few days. Someone had chiseled away limestone that had sealed the opening for decades, maybe centuries. I'm going to take a quick look inside, I told Morrison, just to document any damage. He looked nervous. Want backup? I'll be fine. This is what I do. The cave mouth was narrow, barely wide enough for one person. I switched on my headlamp and squeezed through. The beam cut through darkness that seemed thicker than normal, like walking through black water. The entry tunnel opened into a large chamber carved from natural limestone. My light revealed paintings on the walls, Cherokee symbols and figures I recognized from other sites. But these were different, more detailed, more alive. In the center of the chamber sat a collection of items that made my breath catch. Pottery, tools, jewelry, all arranged in careful patterns. This wasn't just a burial site, it was a museum. But something was missing. I'd studied Cherokee burial practices for years. These sites always contained bones, ancestors laid to rest with their belongings. But this chamber had everything except the dead themselves. I photographed everything, trying to document the site before other people contaminated it. The arrangements were too perfect, too organized. Like someone had been maintaining them. That's when I heard the sound. A soft scraping, like fingernails on stone, coming from deeper in the cave system. I froze, listening. The sound stopped, then started again. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Hello? I called out, thinking maybe the dead hunters had a partner still alive inside. "This is Park Service. I'm here to help." The scraping stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something else, a low humming, barely audible. Not quite music, not quite speech. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. I followed the sound deeper into the cave, my headlamp beam dancing over limestone formations that looked almost like sculptures. The humming grew louder, and I realized it was actually many voices, harmonizing in a language I didn't recognize. The tunnel opened into another chamber, much larger than the first. My light revealed something that made no sense. Bones, thousands of them, arranged in perfect geometric patterns across the floor and stacked along the walls. Skulls, ribs, leg bones, all cleaned and polished until they gleamed white in my light. But these weren't ancient remains. Some still had scraps of modern clothing attached. Fresh clothing. I recognized a hunting jacket from one of the dead men outside. The humming stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard movement in the shadows beyond my light. Footsteps that didn't sound quite right, too light, too quick. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. A figure stepped into my light, and my blood turned to ice. It looked like a Cherokee elder, dressed in traditional clothing that seemed to glow with its own light. But the man was translucent, like looking at someone through water, and in his hands he held a human skull that was definitely not ancient. "You should not be here," he said in perfect English, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. "This is a sacred place." I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. "I'm Catherine Ravencrest. I'm here to protect Cherokee sites." The spirit, because that's what he had to be, tilted his head. "Ravencrest. Your grandmother was Mary Walkingstick." "How do you, yes. How do you know that?" "She knew of our work. She understood the importance of keeping the ancestors safe." He gestured to the bones around us. "We are the bone keepers. We preserve what must not be lost." My scientific mind tried to find rational explanations, hallucinations from bad air, stress-induced visions. Anything but the impossible truth standing in front of me. "The men outside," I managed to say. "Did you? Are they dead?" "They violated sacred ground. They sought to steal from the ancestors." The spirit set down the skull with infinite care. "We took only what they were not worthy to possess. Their bones. Bones carry the spirit. We preserve all who enter this place, so their souls may serve the ancestors in death, since they would not respect them in life." I looked around the chamber with new understanding. These weren't just Cherokee remains, they were everyone who had ever disturbed this place. Archaeologists, treasure hunters, curious hikers, all reduced to carefully arranged calcium monuments. "What about me?" I whispered. The spirit studied me with eyes that held centuries of sadness. "That depends. Do you come as a protector or a trespasser?" The bone keeper led me deeper into the cave system, moving through passages I hadn't seen on any geological survey. The walls were carved with symbols that seemed to shift in my headlamp beam, and the air hummed with energy that made my teeth ache. "My name is James Walkingstick," the spirit said as we walked. "I was keeper of this valley when the white soldiers came to drive us west. I chose to remain, to guard the ancestors." "You died here?" "I gave my life here. There is a difference." He paused at a junction of 3 tunnels. "The valley holds 7 generations of our people. Their bones speak to us, tell us their stories. We cannot let them be scattered or sold." The tunnel opened into the largest chamber yet. My light revealed a site that should have been in a museum, not hidden in a cave. Artifacts filled the space, pottery, weapons, jewelry, tools, all arranged with museum-quality care. But between each display stood figures like James. Translucent Cherokee spirits, each tending different sections of the collection. "We are all keepers," James explained. "All chose to remain rather than abandon our duty." A woman's spirit approached us, her traditional dress flowing like water. "This one has grandmother's blood," she said to James. "Mary Walkingstick was friend to the ancestors." "I know," James replied, "but she carries the white man's tools. She serves their government. I found my voice. I serve the law that protects these sites. I stop people from looting Cherokee graves." "Laws," the woman's spirit laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "We have been protecting these sites for 200 years. Your laws are young children compared to our vigil." They were right, and I knew it. Federal protection laws were barely 50 years old. These spirits had been guarding Cherokee remains since before West Virginia was even a state. "The men outside," I said. "You could have just scared them away." "We tried," James said sadly. "We made the valley cold, turned their tools against them, sealed the cave entrances with new stone. But they broke through. They disturbed the burial chamber of Chief Blackhawk himself. He led me to an alcove where a single skeleton lay on a raised stone platform. Unlike the other remains, these bones were arranged as they would have been in life, wearing a headdress of eagle feathers that somehow hadn't decayed. 700 years he has rested here," James continued. "The thieves broke his rest, scattered his belongings, touched sacred bones with their greedy hands. We could not allow such desecration to go unpunished." I stared at the ancient chief's remains, feeling the weight of history. These weren't just bones, they were people. Leaders, mothers, children, warriors, all depending on the bone keepers to preserve their memory. "But now you have a problem," I said, thinking it through. "Those hunters were reported missing. More people will come looking." The spirits exchanged glances that seemed to carry entire conversations. Finally, James nodded. "Yes, the white man's law will bring investigators. They will want to examine this place, catalog our ancestors like museum pieces. They will not understand. I could help," I said, surprising myself with the words. "I could make sure this place stays protected." "How?" the woman spirit asked. "Your people do not believe in our presence. They will not accept spiritual guardianship as legitimate protection." She was right again. I could write reports about archaeological significance, but I couldn't mention ghost guardians in official documents. My supervisors would have me transferred to a mental health facility. "There has to be a way," I said. "Some legal protection that would keep people out permanently." James studied me for a long moment. "You would do this? Protect the ancestors from your own people?" "It's my job. It's why I became a ranger." "No," he said quietly. "Your job is to serve the white man's government. What we ask would require you to serve the ancestors first, to become a bridge between the living and the dead." The chamber fell silent, except for the distant humming of other spirits, tending their collections. I thought about my grandmother, who had always said our family had responsibilities to both worlds, the world of the living and the world of the spirits. What would that mean, exactly? It would mean accepting that some things are more important than laws and careers. James replied, "It would mean becoming a guardian yourself, even if it costs you everything else." Before I could answer, one of the other spirits called out urgently from a tunnel entrance. James moved quickly to join him, gesturing for me to follow. "More humans approached the valley," the second spirit reported. "Many of them, with vehicles and equipment." My heart sank. The investigation team, they're here early. Through the spirit's supernatural senses, I could see what was coming. FBI agents, forensic specialists, archaeologists from 3 different universities. They would secure the valley as a crime scene, catalog every artifact, and turn this sacred place into a research project. "They will disturb everything," James said grimly. "They will take the ancestors' belongings to laboratories and storage facilities. They will cut holes in our ancient walls and shine bright lights into every chamber." The woman's spirit floated closer to me. "Now you must choose, granddaughter of Mary Walkingstick. Will you help them tear apart our sacred trust, or will you help us preserve it?" I looked around the chamber at 2 centuries of careful preservation, at spirits who had given up their eternal rest to protect something precious. Then I thought about the federal agents already hiking into the valley, ready to treat this place like any other crime scene. "Tell me what you need me to do." The spirits moved with purpose, but I could tell they were struggling. Their supernatural abilities worked well against small groups of treasure hunters, but a full federal investigation was different. "Our power is tied to the sacred nature of this place," James explained as we hurried through the tunnels. "The more it's treated as a crime scene instead of a burial ground, the weaker we become." We emerged from a hidden cave entrance halfway up the valley wall, where I could see the investigation team setting up equipment below. Federal agents, state police, forensic specialists, and at least 3 archaeologists I recognized from professional conferences. "Dr. Ravencrest?" Agent Morrison called up to me through a megaphone. "We need you to come down and brief us on the archaeological significance of this site." I looked at James, who was becoming more translucent as the investigators invaded his valley. If I go down there, I'll have to tell them about the cave system, about the artifacts. Yes, he said sadly, and they will catalog everything, turn our ancestors into specimen numbers. But if I don't cooperate, they'll get a warrant and search anyway, and I'll lose any chance to influence how they treat the site. The woman's spirit appeared beside us. There is another way, but it requires great sacrifice from you. What kind of sacrifice? You must become more than human. Accept the spiritual responsibility your grandmother carried. Become a bridge between worlds, like we are. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. You mean die? Become a spirit like you? Not die, James corrected. Transform. Keep your living body but accept spiritual duties. You would gain some of our abilities, but you could never leave this place. The valley would become your prison and your purpose. Below us, the investigation team was spreading out, setting up lights and equipment. I watched Agent Morrison examine the two bodies, which looked even more wrong in broad daylight. How could I explain what had happened to them? If I accept, I said slowly, what could we accomplish together? We could make them leave, the woman's spirit said. All of them. Make this place so unwelcoming that no one would ever want to return. But that's temporary. Eventually, someone with enough resources and determination will break through whatever supernatural defenses you create. James nodded. True. We need permanent protection, legal protection that your people would respect. An idea was forming in my mind, crazy, but maybe possible. What if we gave them something they wanted more than this site? What if we made them think the important artifacts were somewhere else? Explain. Most of these investigators are here because this looks like a major Cherokee archaeological find. But what if it wasn't? What if this was just a burial site for more recent remains, criminals or outlaws that early settlers buried here to hide their crimes? The spirits exchanged looks. You want us to hide our ancestors' belongings? I want you to move them somewhere safer. Create a decoy site that explains the bone arrangements without revealing the spiritual significance. Let them catalog a few old burial goods while the real treasures remain hidden. And the recent dead? The artifact hunters? I thought about the two deflated bodies below. We tell the truth about them, just not all of it. They were treasure hunters who disturbed an old burial site. They died from exposure. Heart attacks brought on by guilt and fear when they realized what they'd done. James was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, it could work. But it would require you to lie to your own people, to cover up what we did to those men. I've been lying to myself about what I've seen here for the last hour. At this point, I'm more concerned about protecting something precious than following protocol. The woman's spirit smiled, the first happy expression I'd seen from any of them. Mary Walkingstick's granddaughter indeed. You have her wisdom. So you'll do it? Move the important artifacts to a hidden chamber? We will do more than that, James said. We will create a new narrative for this place. The investigators will find exactly what they expect to find, a historical curiosity, but nothing that requires long-term study. I looked down at the federal agents, who were starting to look impatient. I have to go down there now. How long do you need? Give us until sunset, James replied. When you bring them into the caves tomorrow, they will find a very different place. And the cost to me, the spiritual transformation? The woman's spirit touched my shoulder, and I felt warmth flow through me like electricity. It has already begun. You feel it, don't you? The awareness of the ancestors? She was right. I could sense things I shouldn't be able to sense, the location of every spirit in the valley, the exact position of each bone in the hidden chambers, the deep sadness of disturbed graves. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was definitely there. You are becoming a guardian, James said gently. It cannot be undone. But you will not lose your human life, only gain spiritual responsibilities. I thought about my grandmother, who had always seemed to know things she shouldn't know, always spoke of the ancestors as if she could hear them. Maybe this ran in our family after all. Then let's save this place. The investigation lasted 3 days. When I led the team into the cave system, they found exactly what I said they would. A burial site that explained the bone arrangements without revealing the true spiritual significance. The Bone Keepers had worked supernatural miracles in a single night. The vast museum chambers were gone, hidden behind stone walls that looked centuries old. In their place were smaller burial chambers containing remains and artifacts that dated to the early 1800s, recent enough to explain why the bones were so well preserved, old enough to have historical significance. The story I told was simple. Settlers had buried victims of a Flosso, cholera outbreak in the limestone caves, and later superstitious locals had arranged the bones in patterns meant to ward off disease. The recent treasure hunters had disturbed the site and died of heart attacks brought on by guilt and fear. It wasn't completely a lie. Dr. Martinez from the university was disappointed but satisfied. Interesting find, but not the major Cherokee site we hoped for. We'll catalog the remains and return them to tribal authorities for proper reburial. Agent Morrison closed his investigation after the medical examiner confirmed the treasure hunters had died of cardiac arrest. No evidence of foul play, just two men with weak hearts who couldn't handle the stress of their criminal activity. The valley was designated as a restricted historical site protected, but not significant enough to warrant permanent research stations. Perfect. After everyone left, I walked back into the caves alone. The bone keepers were waiting, now visible to me, without supernatural effort. It worked, I said. The valley is safe. For now, James agreed. But there will be others. There always are. He was right. Over the next months, I dealt with hikers who got turned around and found themselves inexplicably frightened by the valley. Photographers whose equipment malfunctioned at crucial moments. Graduate students whose research proposals for the area were mysteriously rejected by their advisors. The bone keepers and I had become partners in protection. I handled the legal and bureaucratic side, making sure proper restrictions stayed in place. They handled the supernatural deterrence, making sure curious visitors lost interest quickly. My supervisor noticed changes in me. I was more intuitive about site protection, seemed to know instinctively when places were threatened. My reports were more detailed, my recommendations more comprehensive. I was promoted twice in 2 years. I never told anyone about my spiritual responsibilities. How could I? But sometimes, late at night in my ranger station, I would feel the ancestors calling. Cherokee voices telling me about new threats to other sites, asking for help protecting places that were sacred but not legally protected. I began expanding my work, consulting with tribal authorities about sites across 3 states. Always careful, always professional, but guided by knowledge that came from sources I couldn't cite in reports. The valley itself became a model for how to manage sensitive archaeological sites. Other rangers asked me for advice on balancing historical preservation with access restrictions. I wrote training materials that were adopted by the National Park Service. But the real work happened in the quiet hours, when I would visit the hidden chambers and help the bone keepers organize new arrivals. Ancestors whose remains had been repatriated from museums. Burial goods returned by collectors who suddenly developed mysterious urges to do the right thing. James was right. I could never leave the valley for long. It called to me like a gravitational force, drawing me back whenever I tried to take vacations or attend conferences too far away. But I didn't mind. This was important work. My grandmother had known, I realized. She'd prepared me for this responsibility without ever directly explaining it. The Cherokee stories she told me, the respect for ancestors she instilled, the way she always said our family had duties to both worlds. Sometimes visitors to the valley asked me about the local legends. I would smile and tell them that mountain people have always had colorful imaginations. But I also made sure they understood that this was a place that demanded respect. Because the ancestors are still watching. And some collections are more important than any individual career or ambition. The bone keepers continue their eternal vigil. And now they have a living partner who understands that protecting the dead is sometimes the most important work the living can do. The valley keeps its secrets, and I help make sure it always will. My name is Elizabeth Moonhart. And I don't believe in ghosts. I know that's a strange way to start this story, considering what happened to me in the spring of 1971, but it's important you understand where I was coming from. I had a PhD in Appalachian Studies from the University of Tennessee. I'd spent 8 years working as a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains, cataloging old settlements and forgotten graveyards. I'd written papers about how ghost stories were just the mountain people's way of dealing with grief and violence. I had explanations for everything. The mountains didn't care about my explanations. It was early March when I got the assignment. Cold mornings, but the afternoons were starting to warm up. Perfect weather for hiking, which meant tourists were coming back. And some of those tourists had been telling strange stories about the Cataract Falls area. Confederate soldiers, the reports said. People claimed they'd seen men in gray uniforms walking through the old cemetery near the falls. Some hikers swore they'd heard gunfire and screaming, even though there were no reenactments scheduled anywhere near that section of the park. My supervisor handed me the file with a tired smile. "Beth, you're our history expert. Go check it out. Probably just some idiots in costume trying to scare people. But we need to document it properly." I packed my gear that afternoon. Camera, notebooks, my surveying tools, camping equipment. The cemetery was 4 miles from the nearest road, deep in a valley that most visitors never saw. If I was going to investigate properly, I'd need to spend at least 2 nights out there. The hike-in was beautiful. Mountain laurel was just starting to bud, and the streams were running high from the winter melt. I knew this area well. I'd mapped the old settlement ruins here 3 years ago. A tiny community had existed in this valley before the Civil War. Just a few families, farmers mostly, trying to make a life in these isolated hills. The cemetery sat on a small rise overlooking where the settlement used to be. Maybe 30 graves, most of them marked with simple stones that were hard to read after 100 years of weather. I documented every one of them during my earlier research. The newest grave was dated 1863. That's when the Civil War came to these mountains. I set up my camp about 50 yards from the cemetery near a clear spring. The sun was getting low, painting everything orange and gold. I started with what I always did, taking photographs of the site, checking for any changes since my last visit. That's when I found the flowers. Fresh flowers. Wildflowers, actually, lying on one of the graves. The stone was for a woman named Sarah McClure. Died 1863, age 24. I picked up the flowers and stared at them. They were asters, purple asters. Pretty things. But my hands started shaking as I looked at them. Asters bloom in the fall. It was March. These flowers shouldn't exist right now. I checked the other graves. More flowers. All asters. All fresh, like they'd been picked that morning. "Okay," I said out loud, trying to calm myself. "Someone's been here recently, that's all. Maybe they had dried flowers and I just didn't notice. But they weren't dried. When I touched the petals, they were soft and moist. Living flowers. Impossible flowers." The temperature dropped. I mean really dropped, like someone had opened a freezer door. I could see my breath suddenly, even though it had been almost 60 degrees just a moment ago. That's when I smelled it. Gunpowder, sharp and acrid, burning my nose. There was no one else in the valley. I'd have seen them on the trail. And there was definitely no reason for the smell of gunpowder. I pulled out my camera with shaking hands and took pictures of the flowers, the graves, everything. The light was getting weird too. There was mist forming in the valley, even though the sky was perfectly clear. My rational brain was screaming explanations at me. Temperature inversions. Natural gases from the ground. Someone playing an elaborate prank. But my gut, the part of me that my PhD couldn't touch, was saying something else entirely. Something was very wrong here. I decided to make dinner and think this through. I had my little camp stove going, heating up some soup, when I heard the sound, footsteps, coming through the trees toward the cemetery. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Park Ranger Moonheart. You're in a restricted area after dark." No answer. But the footsteps continued, slow, deliberate. More than one person. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the cemetery. The mist was thicker now, rolling between the graves like something alive. My light cut through it in weird ways, making shadows that didn't match the trees. And then I saw the footprints. Fresh prints in the mud near the graves. But they weren't from hiking, boots. These were different, the kind of prints old leather boots would make. The kind soldiers wore in the 1862. I'd seen enough Civil War reenactor boots to know the pattern. But there was no one here. Just me, the graves, and the impossible mist. I stood there in the cold, watching my breath cloud in the air, and felt my carefully constructed worldview starting to crack. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I sat in my tent with my flashlight on, listening to sounds that shouldn't exist. Footsteps circling the cemetery. Whispers in a language I almost understood. Once, around midnight, I heard singing a woman's voice, high and clear, singing something that sounded like a hymn. When I finally got up the courage to look outside, there was nothing there. Just mist and darkness and those old stones. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all. Lack of sleep, strange atmospheric conditions. Maybe I was coming down with something. But then I developed my photographs. Every single picture of the cemetery had figures in it. Translucent, gray figures in old-fashioned clothes. Men in Confederate uniforms, women in long dresses, children. They weren't there when I'd taken the pictures, I would have seen them. But there they were in the photographs, clear as day, standing among the graves. My hands shook so badly, I dropped the pictures twice. I'm a scientist. I needed to approach this scientifically. So, I made a list of rational explanations. 1. Camera malfunction, causing double exposures. 2. Reflection effects from the mist. 3. Some kind of chemical reaction in the film. 4. Someone doctored my camera while I wasn't looking. Every explanation felt weak, but I clung to them anyway. I spent that day doing what I should have done initially, proper historical research. I hiked back to my truck and drove to the county library in Gatlinburg. If people were pranking visitors by dressing up as Civil War soldiers, I needed to know what actually happened here. The librarian was an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson. She'd lived in these mountains her whole life. "The Cataract Falls Valley?" she said when I asked. Her face went pale. "You're camping out there?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm documenting the cemetery for the Park Service." She looked at me like I'd said I was swimming with sharks. "Child, nobody goes to that valley. Not locals anyway. Not since." She trailed off, glancing around like she was afraid someone might hear. "Not since what?" She pulled out a thick book from beneath her desk, a local history, handwritten, never published. The kind of record that only existed in small mountain communities. "April 1863, she read. "Guerrilla raid. Confederate bushwhackers came through hunting Union sympathizers. The families in Cataract Falls Valley were neutral, just wanted to be left alone. But the raiders didn't care. They killed everyone, 47 people, men, women, children. Burned the settlement. The bodies were buried in a mass grave somewhere in the valley." I felt cold again, even though the library was warm. "Where's the mass grave?" I asked. "Nobody knows. The few survivors who found the bodies were too traumatized to make proper records. They just buried everyone quick and left. Wouldn't even mark the spot, said the ground was cursed." She closed the book and looked at me with serious eyes. "People see things in that valley, Miss Moonheart. Always have. My grandmother said the dead there don't rest easy. They're waiting for something." I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but I kept thinking about those flowers, the footprints, the figures in my photographs. "What are they waiting for?" I asked. "To be remembered. To have their story told proper. To be mourned right." Mrs. Patterson touched the old book gently. "Mountain folk believe you can't rest if you ain't properly buried. And if 47 people are just thrown in a hole somewhere, with no marker, no ceremony, no one even knowing where they lie, well, that's a powerful wrong." I drove back to the valley as the sun was setting. I knew I should report this to my supervisor, maybe call in a team. But something was pulling me back. Maybe it was my academic curiosity. Maybe it was something else. The temperature dropped the moment I crossed into the valley. 1 minute it was a normal spring evening. The next, I was in winter. And this time, I saw him clearly. A Confederate soldier, standing at the entrance to the cemetery. Young, maybe 20, with a rifle across his chest. He was translucent. I could see the trees through him, but he was there, real, watching me. I froze on the trail. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. The soldier didn't move, just stood there, like he was on guard duty. "Hello?" My voice came out as a whisper. He turned his head toward me. His eyes were sad. So incredibly sad. And then he spoke. His voice sounded like it was coming from far away, like an old radio with bad reception. "Can't let 'em be disturbed. They's restin' here, gotta protect 'em." He was speaking in old mountain dialect, the kind I'd studied but never actually heard spoken. I'm not here to disturb anyone. I managed to say. You're the history keeper, he said. We've seen you before. You write things down, make records. Yes, that's my job. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he gestured toward the cemetery with his rifle. There's more than just these here graves. There's others, hidden, forgotten, need someone to remember, need someone to tell the truth of what happened. More figures were appearing now, materializing out of the mist like they'd always been there, and I just hadn't been able to see them. Men, women, children, all in clothes from the 1,860 seconds, all with that same look of profound sadness. A woman stepped forward. She was holding the hand of a little girl, maybe 6 years old. My babies, the woman said, her voice breaking. All my babies are in the ground, but ain't nobody knows where. Ain't nobody mourns for 'em proper. The little girl looked at me with empty eyes. It hurt, she said simply. When they killed us, it hurt real bad. I felt tears running down my face. These weren't just ghosts or hallucinations. These were people. Real people who'd suffered something terrible. And somehow, impossibly, they were still here. I don't understand, I said. How is this possible? An elderly woman pushed through the crowd of spirits. She was different from the others, older, dressed in clothes that looked more Cherokee than European settler. She radiated authority. The land remembers, she said in a voice like wind through pines. Blood soaked deep here, not just from the new war, old wars too, old deaths. We hold the memory when the living forget. She pointed at the ground with a gnarled finger. 47 souls lie beneath your feet. No markers, no prayers, just earth thrown over broken bodies. And now the new people want to build here. Want to cut the trees and move the dirt. Want to destroy what little piece we got left. Build? What do you mean build? The Confederate soldier spoke again. We hear things. People talking, plans, going to make this valley into something for the tourists, boardwalks and bathrooms and such. Going to dig right through where they buried us. My stomach dropped. I'd heard rumors about development plans for this section of the park. Nothing official yet, but there were always politicians pushing for more improvements to attract visitors. I can stop it, I said quickly. If there's an unmarked mass grave, they can't build here. It's protected by federal law, but I need to find it. Can you show me where it is? The spirits looked at each other. Silent communication passing between them. The ground ain't stable there, the soldier said. It'll give way. Dangerous. I'll be careful, please. I want to help you. The elderly Cherokee woman studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Come with us, history keeper. We'll show you where our bones lie. But you got to promise you got to tell the truth. All of it. Not just the comfortable parts. I promise. The spirits began moving through the cemetery, and somehow I knew I was meant to follow them. They were leading me to something that would change everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the weight of forgotten history. The spirits led me through the darkness like I was in a procession. 20, 30, maybe more of them, all walking in silence through the trees. The mist followed us, or maybe we followed it. Everything felt dreamlike, impossible, but my feet on the ground were real. The cold air in my lungs was real, and the sadness rolling off these people in waves that was real too. We walked for maybe 15 minutes, deeper into the valley. The spirits moved through trees and rocks like they weren't there, but I had to scramble around obstacles. More than once I stumbled, and each time the Confederate soldier would pause, waiting for me to catch up. Finally, we stopped in a small clearing I'd never noticed before. It was surrounded by thick mountain laurel, hidden from the main trail. The ground was slightly sunken, like something beneath had settled over time. Here, the elderly Cherokee woman said, this is where they threw us, like garbage, like we was nothing. I pulled out my flashlight and surveyed the area. The depression in the ground was roughly 30 feet across, big enough for 47 bodies if they'd been piled without care. How deep? I asked. Shallow, the woman in the long dress said, the one who talked about her babies. They was in a hurry, scared, just wanted to cover us and run. I felt sick thinking about it. The violence, the terror, the complete disregard for human dignity. I need to document this, I said. Take measurements, photographs. Get soil samples. Build a case that will force the Park Service to protect this site. We'll help you, the soldier said. But you got to understand we can't always be here. It takes energy to show ourselves. We draw it from the mountain, from the water, from the seasons. Spring and fall, when the veil's thin, we're strongest. But come summer, we fade. And if they tear up this land, break the springs, cut the old trees, we won't be able to come back at all. That's when I understood the real stakes. This wasn't just about protecting a historical site. These spirits would be destroyed, truly destroyed, if the development went through. When are they planning to start construction? I asked. The spirits looked at each other uneasily. Soon, the Cherokee woman said. Weeks, maybe. We hear the survey. People talking. They've been walking the valley with their machines, marking things. I haven't seen any surveyors. You've been looking at the wrong times. They come in the morning, early, before hikers arrive. They leave before dark. They feel us watching, even if they can't see us. Makes them nervous. I spent the rest of that night taking measurements and photographs. The spirits watched silently, occasionally pointing out details I would have missed. A slight rise that might indicate where individual bodies were placed. A depression that could be a child's grave. Stone markers that had been deliberately hidden under leaves and dirt. As I worked, they told me their stories. The soldier's name was Thomas. He'd been 19 when he died, shot through the chest while defending his younger sister. His sister was here too, Rebecca, 17, who died trying to run to the woods. The woman with the empty-eyed little girl was Mary. She'd watched all 3 of her children killed before they shot her too. Her husband had been away trading in Knoxville. He'd come home to find his entire family murdered. He went crazy with grief, Mary said softly. Died 6 months later. Some say he starved himself to death. Some say he walked into the winter woods and let the cold take him. Either way, he wanted to be with us, but he ain't here. I don't know where his spirit went. Each story was worse than the last. A 16-year-old boy killed trying to protect his grandmother. Twin babies thrown into the fire of their burning cabin. An old man shot just because he was there. Senseless violence that accomplished nothing except to add more ghosts to these mountains. The Cherokee woman, her name was Ayana, which meant eternal blossom, had the oldest story. She died in 1838 during the forced removals. She'd been sick, couldn't keep up with the others being marched away. They'd left her to die in these hills. And somehow her spirit had remained. I was here before them, she said, gesturing to the Civil War dead. And I'll be here after, if I can. This valley is sacred ground, always has been. The new people don't understand that. They think if they can't see something on their maps, it don't matter. By dawn, I had a full documentation of the mass grave site. Photographs, measurements, soil samples, detailed notes. Enough evidence to stop any development plans. But as the sun rose, the spirits began to fade. We'll be back tonight, Thomas said as he became translucent. But you gotta work fast, History Keeper. Time's running out. They disappeared like smoke and wind. And suddenly, I was alone in the clearing with only my equipment and the growing horror of what I'd discovered. I hiked back to my truck and drove straight to park headquarters. It was barely 7 a.m., but I needed to talk to my supervisor immediately. Tom Hendricks had been running this district for 20 years. He was a good man, practical, focused on keeping visitors safe and the park beautiful. When I burst into his office with my evidence, he listened carefully. Then he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Beth, I'm going to be straight with you. We've known about that mass grave for years. I stared at him. What? 1,955. A survey team found it, took samples, confirmed human remains, but they were instructed to keep it quiet. The Park Service was brand new to this area, just took over from the state in '34. They didn't want controversy, so they marked it on some internal maps and basically forgot about it, but that's illegal. Under the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, which wasn't passed until 1979, Tom interrupted gently. Different times, Beth, different priorities, and now, he pulled out a folder. Now we've got Congressman Bradley pushing hard for development. Tourist facilities, improved trails, a visitor center right in the Cataract Falls Valley, brings jobs, brings money. He's got support from the governor. They can't build on a mass grave. They can if nobody officially knows about it. He looked at me seriously. Beth, I believe what you found, but if you push this, you're going against some powerful people. Your career could be over. I don't care about my career. Those people deserve to be remembered. They deserve respect. I agree with you, but you need to understand what you're up against. I left his office, shaking with anger. But I also left with a plan. If the Park Service wouldn't help me, I'd go over their heads. Federal archaeologists, the media, historians at the university. Someone would listen. That afternoon, I made calls to everyone I could think of. Most people were polite but non-committal. A few were interested but wanted more evidence. One archaeologist from the University of Tennessee said she'd come out next week to examine the site. Next week might be too late. I drove back to the valley as the sun was setting, determined to gather more evidence. But when I reached my campsite, I found it had been destroyed. My tent was slashed open. My equipment was scattered everywhere. Someone had poured water over my notes, making them illegible. And scratched into the dirt in large letters was a message. Leave now or else. I stood there, shaking not from fear, but from fury. Someone was trying to scare me away. Someone who knew what I'd found and wanted it to stay hidden. The temperature dropped. Mist rolled in, and the spirits appeared, more of them than I'd seen before. Dozens of figures, all watching the destruction of my camp with anger in their translucent eyes. They're scared of you, Thomas said. The living folk who want to build here, they know you can stop them. Who did this? Men in trucks came this afternoon, said bad things about you, said you were crazy, making up stories, said you'd have an accident if you kept poking around. An accident. That was a threat that couldn't be mistaken. But I wasn't leaving. These people living and dead needed me to stand firm. I'm not going anywhere, I said out loud. I'm going to tell your story, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what happened here. Ayanna stepped forward, her ancient face grave. Then you need our protection, History Keeper. Because the men who threatened you, they ain't done. They'll come back, and next time they won't just destroy your things. The spirits formed a circle around me as darkness fell, and I realized I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I wasn't just documenting history anymore. I was part of it. And whatever happened next, I wouldn't be facing it alone. The attack came at midnight. I was in my destroyed tent, trying to salvage what I could of my notes, when I heard the trucks. 2 of them, engines rumbling as they forced their way down a maintenance road that wasn't supposed to be used after dark. The spirits appeared. Instantly, dozens of them, forming a wall between me and the approaching vehicles. Hide, Thomas hissed. Get deep in the laurel. We'll hold them off as long as we can. Hold them off? You're ghosts, how can you? This is our land, our valley. We got more power here than you know. Now go. I grabbed my camera and what remained of my documentation and scrambled into the thick mountain laurel. The branches scraped my face and tore at my clothes, but I pushed deeper, finding a hollow where I could crouch and watch. 3 men got out of the trucks. I recognized one of them, Dale Pritchard, a local contractor who'd been pushing for development contracts in the park. The other 2 were younger, probably workers. Moonheart, Pritchard shouted. We know you're here. Time to have a talk about minding your own business. The temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the truck's windshields in seconds. One of the younger men cursed and pulled his jacket tighter. The hell? It was 60 degrees a minute ago. Just the mountain, Pritchard said, but his voice shook. Come on, find her. They spread out, flashlights cutting through the darkness. They were heading toward my tent when the spirits attacked. I'd thought ghosts couldn't interact with physical objects. I was wrong. Rocks flew through the air, pelting the men. One of them screamed as branches whipped at his face, seemingly on their own. The truck's headlights exploded in a shower of glass. But the worst was the sound. The spirits were screaming not in fear, but in rage. 100 years of anger and pain poured out in inhuman shrieks that echoed through the valley. The sound of the massacre itself, preserved and replayed. The 2 younger men broke and ran, stumbling over rocks and roots in their panic. But Pritchard stood his ground, his face pale but determined. I don't care what kind of trick this is, he shouted. You're not stopping progress. This development is happening whether you like it or not. Ayanna materialized directly in front of him. Fully solid, fully visible, ancient and terrible in her fury. This is Cherokee land, she said in a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself. Stolen land, bloodied land, sacred land. You will not desecrate it further." Pritchard stared at her, all color draining from his face. He was seeing her, really seeing her. And the reality of what he was facing finally broke through his greed. He ran. The spirits watched him flee, then turned toward where I was hiding. "You can come out now, History Keeper." I crawled out of the laurel, my heart still pounding. The valley was quiet again, except for the sound of the trucks disappearing into the distance. "Thank you," I managed to say. "We can't always do that," Thomas said. He looked exhausted somehow, faded. "Takes too much from us, but we had to protect you. You're the only one who's willing to fight for us." "What do I do now?" "They'll be back. Maybe with more men, maybe with guns." "You use what you got," Ayanna said. "Your words, your proof. You tell our story where they can't silence you." She was right. Running back to my truck, I drove straight through the night to Knoxville. By 6 a.m., I was at the university, pounding on the office door of Dr. Margaret Whitfield, the archaeologist who'd said she'd help. I showed her everything. The photographs of the spirits, the measurements, the soil samples, my documented conversations with the dead. She listened to it all, her expression growing more serious by the minute. "This is going to cause a firestorm," she finally said. "But it's also the most important archaeological find in the Smokies in decades. I'll make calls. Federal people, other universities, the media. By tonight, you'll have so much attention on this site that no one will dare touch it." She kept her word. By that evening, the story was breaking on regional news. Mass grave found in Smokies, park ranger reports, threatened for making discovery. Dr. Whitfield gave interviews, carefully avoiding the parts about ghosts, but emphasizing the historical and archaeological significance. The phone in my tiny apartment rang off the hook. Reporters, other archaeologists, even someone from the Smithsonian. By the next morning, federal investigators were on their way to examine the site. Congressman Bradley tried to fight it. He held a press conference, calling it a hoax, claiming I was an unstable young woman making up stories to block legitimate economic development. But Dr. Whitfield released the soil analysis. Human bone fragments, carbon dating, putting them right in the 1,860 seconds. Physical proof that couldn't be dismissed. The development project was put on hold pending a full archaeological investigation. I returned to the valley 1 week later, accompanied by a team of researchers. As we worked, carefully excavating and documenting the mass grave, I felt the spirits watching. They didn't appear too many people around, but I knew they were there. We found 47 sets of remains, just like the spirits had said. Men, women, children, evidence of violent death on almost every skeleton. Bullet wounds, skull fractures. The bones told the story of a massacre. But we also found something else. Buried with the bodies were personal items that had survived the century in the soil. A wedding ring, a child's toy carved from wood, a locket with a faded photograph. Small treasures that the killers had missed. Each item was catalogued, photographed, treated with the respect and care it deserved. The respect these people should have received 108 years ago. As the sun set on that first day of excavation, I walked away from the team to stand alone in the clearing. The temperature dropped, the mist rolled in, and the spirits appeared one last time, all together, watching their bones being finally treated with dignity. "You kept your promise," Ayanna said. "You told the truth. I couldn't have done it without you." Mary, the woman who'd lost her children, was crying. But this time the tears seemed different. Not grief, relief. "My babies will have names again," she said. "Markers. People will know they lived and died here. They won't be forgotten." "Never forgotten," I promised. "I'm going to write a complete history of what happened. Academic papers, yes, but also a book that regular people can read. Your story will be taught, remembered." Thomas smiled the first time I'd seen him look anything but sad. "Then our work is done. We can rest now." "All of you?" "Most of us." He gestured to Ayanna and a few others. "Some of us choose to stay. Guardians, making sure this place stays protected. But the others, the children, the ones who've been waiting so long they can move on now." As I watched, the spirits began to fade. Not disappearing into mist like before, but actually fading, becoming less solid, less present. Moving toward something I couldn't see, but could somehow feel. A warmth, a peace. The children went first, running toward that invisible threshold like they were going home. Mary followed her babies with a cry of joy. Thomas gave me a final salute before walking into the light. One by one, they left, until only Ayanna remained, solid and strong and eternal. "I'll stay," she said. "This valley needs a guardian, and you'll need help, History Keeper. There are other places in these mountains, other forgotten graves, other stories waiting to be told. You'll show me? When the time's right. For now, finish your work here. Do it right. These bones deserve a proper burial and a proper memorial." She faded into the twilight, but I knew she wasn't gone. Just waiting, watching. I stood in the clearing until full dark, feeling the weight of what had happened. I'd come to this valley as a skeptic, armed with science and reason. I was leaving as something else. A witness, a storyteller, a bridge between the living and the dead. The Cataract Falls Massacre Memorial was dedicated on the 15th of April 1972, exactly 109 years after the raid. 47 names were carved into granite, recovered from old records and family histories that Dr. Whitfield and I spent months tracking down. Each name had a date of birth and death. Each was acknowledged as a real person who'd lived and loved and died in these mountains. The memorial was simple but beautiful, designed to fit naturally into the valley landscape. Native plants surrounded it: mountain laurel, rhododendrons, wildflowers. A place for reflection and remembrance. Hundreds of people came to the dedication ceremony. Descendants of the victims, historians, park officials, reporters. Even Congressman Bradley showed up, probably trying to save face with voters. He didn't speak, though. That honor went to Dr. Whitfield and me. I kept my speech short. I talked about the importance of remembering history, even the painful parts. About how these mountains held stories that deserved to be told. About the 47 people who'd waited over a century for recognition. I didn't mention the ghosts. That was between me and the valley. But as I spoke, I felt the temperature drop slightly, saw mist forming in the corners of my vision. The spirits were there for their own memorial, bearing witness to their names being spoken aloud, officially, finally. After the ceremony, I was approached by a dozen different groups. Universities wanted me to consult on other unmarked grave sites in the Appalachians. The Park Service offered me a promotion to head their new Cultural Heritage Protection Program. A publisher wanted me to write a book about the massacre and its discovery. I accepted the Park Service position. The book would come later, after I'd done more research, found more forgotten places. Because Ayanna had been right, there were other stories waiting. Over the next 5 years, working with the spirits who'd chosen to remain as guardians, I documented 17 more unmarked burial sites throughout the Smokies. Cherokee graves from the Trail of Tears, early settler cemeteries lost to time and vegetation, unknown casualties from the Civil War. Each site received protection, proper archaeological study, and memorials. I became known as the ranger who could sense where forgotten graves were located. People thought I had some kind of gift for reading landscapes, for understanding historical patterns. They weren't entirely wrong, but they didn't know about my guides. The spirits who walked with me through the mountains, pointing out depressions in the ground that looked natural but weren't, showing me trees that had been used as grave markers, whispering stories that had never been written down. I never spoke publicly about the supernatural aspects of my work. I didn't have to. The physical evidence spoke for itself. And if people wanted to believe I was just exceptionally good at my job, that was fine. The spirits didn't need credit, they just needed to be remembered. The Cataract Falls Valley became a place of pilgrimage for people interested in mountain history. Respectful visitors who came to pay their respects, leave flowers, acknowledge the dead. The development project was permanently canceled, and the entire valley was designated as a protected cultural site. On quiet evenings, when I return to the valley alone, I can still see them. Ayanna, always. Thomas sometimes, choosing to remain until he was sure his sister was properly honored. Mary, occasionally, visiting her children's graves. They don't speak as much anymore. Don't need to. But their presence is a comfort, a reminder that I'm doing important work, that history matters, that the dead deserve their stories told. I'm 36 years old now, in the spring of 1976. I have a PhD, a shelf of awards for cultural preservation, and a book contract to write the definitive history of Civil War atrocities in Appalachia. I've helped protect and memorialize over 300 forgotten graves across the Smokies. But more importantly, I know the truth about these mountains. They remember. The land itself holds memory, like water holds heat, releasing it slowly over generations. And sometimes, when the veil between living and dead grows thin, that memory takes form and walks among us. I don't tell people I believe in ghosts. It makes them uncomfortable, makes them question my scientific credibility. But I don't have to tell them. I know the truth, and so do the spirits who've trusted me with their stories. Last week, Ayana appeared to me near a remote ridge in the park's backcountry. "There's another place," she said. "Further north. A healing spring that was sacred ground long before the Cherokee came to these mountains. Bones buried there from people so old they have no names in any living tongue. The Park Service wants to build a trail through that area. I'll stop them, I promised." She smiled. "I know you will, History Keeper. That's why we chose you." As I write this, sitting in my small office in park headquarters, I can see the mountains through my window. In the fading light, I sometimes catch glimpses of figures moving through the trees. Rangers from a different time, still on patrol. Settlers still working land they died protecting. Children still playing in valleys where their bones rest. The mountains are full of ghosts, and I'm grateful for every one of them, because they remind me that history isn't something dead and buried. It's alive, watching, waiting to be acknowledged. And as long as there are people willing to listen, willing to look beyond what's comfortable and accepted, the dead will never truly be forgotten. The work continues. The stories multiply, and the spirits of the mourning mountains keep watch, knowing that at least one person in the world of the living will never stop fighting for them to be remembered. My name is Elizabeth Moonhart, and I believe in ghosts because I've met them, worked with them, been saved by them, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure their voices are heard. My name is Thomas Ashford, and I've been a park ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 15 years. 3 generations of my family have walked these West Virginia mountains, and I thought I knew every hollow, every ridge, every old mining road from here to Spruce Mountain. My granddaddy used to tell stories about hollow folk, people who went into the mountains and came back different, if they came back at all. I always figured it was just mountain talk, the kind of stories old-timers tell to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. I was wrong about a lot of things. It was late November, 1962, when everything changed. The first snow had dusted the ridges, and the bare trees made it easy to see into places that stayed hidden most of the year. I was 39 then, old enough to know these mountains like the back of my hand, young enough to think I could handle whatever they threw at me. After Korea and 15 years of search and rescue work, I'd seen enough to know that the real dangers in these hills were things like cave-ins, bear attacks, and folks who got turned around and froze to death before we could find them. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 4 researchers from West Virginia University had gone missing in Kettle Creek Hollow, about 12 miles from the nearest logging road. They'd been studying Appalachian folklore, interviewing old families about mountain legends and such. Their base camp was supposed to be a simple overnight setup, but they'd been silent for 3 days. My supervisor, Bill Henderson, handed me the radio and a thermos of coffee. "Take a look, Tom. Probably just equipment failure. College boys don't always know how to work a radio properly." I loaded my pack with the usual gear, rope, first aid kit, emergency shelter, 3 days of rations. My compass, the same one my daddy had carried, went into my shirt pocket. Fresh batteries in the flashlight, signal mirror, emergency whistle, standard. Stuff for a preliminary scout. If I didn't radio back by evening, Bill would send a full team. The hike to Kettle Creek took me 4 hours through familiar country. I'd rescued 2 lost hunters in this area just last spring, helped a geology team map some caves back in '59. The trail was clear enough, following an old logging cut through stands of oak and maple. But as I got closer to the hollow, something felt off. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. The air was still, which wasn't unusual for late November. The temperature seemed about right for the season. But there was something in the quiet that didn't sit well with me. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, even the wind seemed to have died completely. When I reached the rim of Kettle Creek Hollow and looked down into the valley, I could see their camp right away. 4 orange tents arranged in a neat square around a cold fire pit. A white pickup truck parked where the old mining road ended. Everything looked normal, from a distance, like they'd just stepped away for a hike. But as I made my way down the slope, that wrongness I'd been feeling got stronger. The temperature dropped at least 15 degrees as soon as I crossed into the hollow proper. My breath started steaming, and I had to zip up my jacket. The air tasted metallic, like I'd been sucking on a penny, and it made my stomach feel queasy. I called out as I approached the camp. "Hello, Park Service. Anyone here?" My voice echoed funny in the hollow, like the sound was being swallowed up by something thick and heavy. No answer came back. The camp was intact but abandoned. Tents still staked down properly, guy lines tight. Sleeping bags laid out inside like people had just gotten up for the morning. Food still in coolers, some of it fresh enough that it should have spoiled by now. Personal items scattered around. Notebooks, cameras, a thermos still half full of coffee that should have been stone cold but felt warm to the protector. Touch. What really bothered me was the silence. Complete silence. Like someone had put a glass jar over the whole hollow. I pulled out my compass to check my bearings, and the needle spun in slow circles, never settling on any direction. My watch had stopped at 3:17, though I could have sworn it was working fine when I started down the trail. I found their research notes scattered around one of the tents. Pages and pages of interviews with local families, stories about mountain people who ain't quite people no more. One page caught my attention. Asterisk. Mrs. Ethel Cochran, age 78, Dry Fork resident. My great-uncle Vernon went into them mines during the Coal Wars, back in 1921. Come back 3 days later, but something was wrong with his face. Eyes too far apart, you know? And he was always cold after that, no matter how many quilts we piled on him. Mama said the mountain took something out of him and put something else in its place. Asterisk. I was starting to feel like maybe those college boys had gotten spooked by all the ghost stories and decided to pack up and leave. But then I found the footprints. 4 sets of boot prints led away from the camp toward the tree line. Normal enough at first, but as I followed them, they got strange. The spacing was wrong. Steps too long for normal walking, then too short, like people were stumbling or being dragged. And about 50 yards from camp, the prints started changing shape. Getting longer, wider. The last clear track I could see showed a normal boot sole at the heel, but where the toes should have been, the print spread out into something that looked more like a hand than a foot. That's when I noticed the trees around the camp perimeter, symbols carved into the bark, fresh cuts that were already starting to weep sap. They looked like letters, but from no alphabet I recognized. Sharp, angular marks that hurt to look at for too long. I tried the radio, but got nothing but static. The hollow seemed to eat. Radio waves the same way it swallowed sound. I should have turned around right then, hiked back up to the rim where I could get a signal and call for backup. That would have been the smart thing to do. Instead, I followed those impossible footprints toward the old mine entrance at the far end of the hollow. The mine shaft had been abandoned since the 1922, sealed up after some kind of accident during the Coal Wars. But the boards across the entrance had been torn away recently, planks scattered around with fresh claw marks gouged deep into the wood. A smell drifted out of the opening, sulfur and something else, something sweet and rotten that made me want to gag. The footprints led right up to the mine entrance and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, flashlight in hand, telling myself that people don't just change shape when they walk. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe the ground was soft, distorting the prints. Maybe animals had been walking over the same tracks, confusing the pattern. But I'd been tracking lost folks for 15 years, and I knew what I was seeing. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped into the mine. The beam seemed weaker than it should have been, barely cutting through the darkness ahead. The tunnel was shored up with old timber, most of it still solid despite 40 years of abandonment. My footsteps echoed strangely, like someone was walking behind me, matching my pace exactly. About 50 feet in, I found the first piece of evidence that the college kids had been here. A red flannel shirt, torn and hanging from a support beam. But when I examined it closer, something was wrong. The fabric looked old, like it had been underground for decades instead of days. The threads were brittle, and it smelled like grave dirt. The tunnel branched ahead. The main shaft continued straight back into the mountain, while a smaller passage angled off to the right. I could see more of those, carved symbols on the walls, the same angular marks I'd found on the trees around camp. They seemed to follow the right-hand tunnel. I chose to go right. The passage sloped downward, and the temperature kept dropping. Soon I could see my breath in the flashlight beam. The symbols on the walls got more elaborate as I went deeper, carved into the rock itself rather than just scratched into timber. Some of them looked almost like warnings. If warnings could be made without using any human language, that's when I heard the whispers. Soft voices echoing from somewhere ahead, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The language sounded old, like something from before English came to these mountains. I called out again, hoping it was the missing researchers, but the whispers stopped immediately. The silence that followed felt hungry. I found the second piece of evidence in a small chamber where the tunnel widened out. Jake Morrison's ranger jacket, spread out on the ground, like someone had laid it there carefully. My blood went cold when I saw it, because Jake Morrison had been my partner for 5 years before he got killed in a logging accident 3 years ago. I picked up the jacket with shaking hands. It was Jake's, all right, same tears in the left sleeve, same coffee stain on the front where he'd spilled his thermos during a rescue back in '58. But it was impossible. Jake was buried in Riverside Cemetery. I'd been a pallbearer at his funeral. My radio crackled to life. "Tom, you copy? This is Jake. I'm about 10 minutes out from the hollow. What's your situation?" Jake's voice, clear as day. Same gravelly tone, same slight accent from growing up in Mingo County. I stood there in that dark tunnel, holding his jacket, listening to his voice coming through my radio, and felt reality starting to crack around the edges. "Jake?" I whispered into the radio. "Jake, is that really you?" "Course, it's me, partner. Bill sent me out when you didn't check in. I'm coming down into the hollow now." "Where are you exactly?" I should have been relieved to hear a familiar voice, should have been glad for backup, but something was wrong with the transmission. Jake's words were just slightly off, like someone doing an impression of him who'd learned the voice but not quite the rhythm. And there were gaps between his words that lasted a beat too long. "I'm in the mine," I said. "The old coal mine at the back of the hollow. Jake, how are you?" The radio went dead. I stood there in the darkness, holding Jake's jacket, trying to make sense of what was happening. Maybe I'd misremembered the accident. Maybe Jake had been injured, not killed, and I'd gotten confused. Maybe the stress of the missing researchers and the strange atmosphere in the hollow was making me remember things wrong. But I knew what I knew. Jake Morrison was dead. I'd watched them lower his casket into the ground. The whispers started again, closer. This time, multiple voices, speaking in that strange old language. And underneath the whispers, I could hear something else, a rhythmic tapping on the tunnel walls, like someone sending a message in code. But when I shined my flashlight around, there was no one there. I decided to head back to the surface. Whatever was happening in this mine, I needed backup and equipment I didn't have. Real backup. Not voices on the radio claiming to be dead men. But when I turned around, the tunnel looked different. The symbols on the walls had changed position, or maybe there were new ones I hadn't noticed before. The passage seemed longer than when I'd walked down it, and I could swear there were more side tunnels than there had been before. I started walking back toward what I hoped was the entrance, following my own footprints in the mine dust. But after 10 minutes of walking, I should have reached the surface. Instead, I found myself in another chamber I didn't remember entering. This one was larger, with several tunnels branching off in different directions. And in the center of the chamber, somebody had arranged 4 sleeping bags in a circle around a cold fire pit. The same orange sleeping bags I'd seen in the tents at the research camp. The whispers were coming from all the tunnels now, echoing back and forth until they sounded like a whole crowd of people having a conversation I couldn't understand. The tapping on the walls got faster and more insistent. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond my flashlight beam, I could hear breathing that wasn't my own. That's when I saw the first set of eyes. They reflected my flashlight beam from one of the side tunnels, too high off the ground to be an animal, too far apart to be human. As I watched, they moved closer, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been a face, but the proportions were wrong. The eyes were indeed too far apart, the mouth too wide, the whole thing just slightly off in a way that made my skin crawl. "Tom?" The voice that came from that direction was Jake's, but it didn't match the thing I was looking at. "Tom, is that you? I've been looking all over for you." More eyes appeared in the other tunnels. 4 sets total, all reflecting my light, all attached to shapes that moved wrong in the darkness. And all of them were calling my name in voices I recognized. "Mr. Ashford?" That was Sarah Chen, one of the missing researchers. I'd seen her photo in the missing persons report. "We've been waiting for you. We need your help. Tom, come over here." Jake's voice again, but coming from a different tunnel now. "You need to see this. Please help us," another voice said. "Dr. Marcus Webb, the lead researcher. We can't find our way out." I backed toward the center of the chamber, swinging my flashlight from tunnel to tunnel. Each time the beam caught those eyes, they would duck back into the darkness. But I could see enough to know that, whatever was calling to me in familiar voices, they weren't the people I was looking for. The tapping on the walls suddenly stopped, the whispers faded away, and in the complete silence that followed, I heard footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps, all walking toward the chamber from different directions, all walking at exactly the same pace. I ran. I picked the tunnel that seemed to slope upward and ran as hard as I could in the dim light of my failing flashlight. Behind me, I could hear them following, 4 sets of footsteps that moved too smoothly, too quietly for normal human beings. They weren't running. They didn't need to run. They knew these tunnels better than I did. "Tom, wait up," Jake's voice echoed from behind me. "What's wrong, partner?" "It's just us." I didn't answer. I just kept running, following the tunnel as it curved and branched, hoping to find some way back to the surface. My light was getting dimmer by the minute, even though I'd put fresh batteries in that morning. The cold was so intense now that my hands were starting to go numb. The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one with a shaft leading straight up. I could see a faint circle of gray light far above, maybe 50 feet up, maybe more. It had to be another entrance to the mine, probably an old ventilation shaft or a secondary entrance I hadn't known about. I found the remains of an old wooden ladder bolted to the shaft wall. Most of the rungs had rotted away, but enough remained that I might be able to climb out if I was careful. It was a hell of a risk, but staying down here with whatever was hunting me seemed like a worse one. I started climbing. The wood was slippery with moisture, and some of it crumbled under my weight, but I made steady progress upward. Behind me, I could hear them entering the chamber. Their voices drifted up the shaft, still calling my name, still trying to sound like people I knew. "Tom, that's not safe," Jake said. "Come down from there. Let us help you." "Mr. Ashford, please," Sarah Chen's voice added. "We're scared too. Don't leave us down here." I was about 20 feet up when my flashlight finally died completely. The shaft went black, except for that dim circle of light above me. I felt around for the next rung, testing each piece of wood before putting my weight on it. That's when something grabbed my ankle. The grip was ice cold and strong enough to crush bone. I looked down into the darkness and saw eyes reflecting what little light filtered down from above. One of them had climbed up after me, moving in complete silence. "Come down, Tom," Jake's voice said from right below me. "We just want to talk." I kicked as hard as I could and felt my boot connect with something solid. The grip loosened for a second, and I scrambled higher up the ladder. More rungs broke under my desperate climb, sending pieces of rotten wood clattering down the shaft. The thing below me didn't make any sound when the debris hit it. No curse, no grunt of pain, nothing. It just kept climbing. I reached for the next rung and felt my hand close on empty air. The ladder ended about 15 feet short of the opening. I was stuck on a broken ladder in a dark shaft with something that looked like my dead partner climbing up after me. Above me, the circle of light was blocked out. Something was moving around up there, and as my eyes adjusted, I could make out a silhouette against the gray November sky. A human silhouette, but the proportions were wrong in the same way I'd seen in the tunnels. "Hello down there," a new voice called. "Dr. Linda Rodriguez, another member of the research team. Having trouble getting out?" They had me surrounded. Below and above, all the exits covered. I pressed myself against the shaft wall and tried to think. The stones were rough limestone, with enough cracks and ledges that I might be able to climb if I was careful. And desperate enough, I started working my way around the shaft, feeling for handholds in the rock. My fingers were so cold I could barely feel the stone, but I found a crack just wide enough to get a grip. Then another. Slowly, carefully, I began climbing up the shaft wall instead of the ladder. "That's very dangerous, Tom," Jake's voice said from below. He was right underneath me now, close enough that I could hear him breathing. "You could fall and hurt yourself." Something about the way he said it made my blood freeze. There was no concern in his voice, no friendship, just hunger. Like he was looking forward to me falling. I kept climbing, moving around the shaft to stay away from the thing, waiting at the top. The limestone was treacherous, slick with moisture and crumbling in places, but it held my weight. 10 more feet, 5 more feet. I was almost level with the opening when the thing above me spoke again. "We used to be like you," Dr. Rodriguez's voice said. "Warm, alive, full of blood and breath and dreams." The mountain was so hungry, Tom. It's been hungry for so long. I pulled myself over the edge and rolled away from the shaft opening. I was in a small clearing, surrounded by pine trees, maybe a quarter mile from where I'd entered the mine. Late afternoon light filtered through the clouds, and the sight of open sky made me dizzy with relief. But the relief didn't last long. They were all around me. 4 figures stood at the edges of the clearing, just inside the tree line. They looked like the missing researchers. Same clothes, same basic build, same faces. But the details were wrong. Eyes too far apart, mouths too wide, skin that looked waxy and pale like it had never seen sunlight. And when they moved like people who had forgotten how human bodies were supposed to work. The mountain was here before the Cherokee, the thing wearing Dr. Webb's face said. Before the coal, before the mines, before people learned to dig down into dark places. It's been feeding for thousands of years. "We went into the mine to hide," Sarah Chen's voice added. "During the coal wars, when the company men were shooting at anyone who looked like a union organizer, we thought we'd be safe underground. But the mountain was hungry," Dr. Rodriguez said. "It ate our warmth first, then our memories, then everything that made us human. But it left the shells walking around, empty things that remember being alive." Jake stepped out from behind a pine tree. He looked exactly like my old partner, down to the scar on his chin from a childhood accident. But his eyes were black holes, and when he smiled, I could see that his teeth had grown pointed. "It's not so bad, Tom," he said in that familiar voice. "The hunger stops after a while. You stop remembering what it felt like to be warm." They started walking toward me, all 4 of them, moving with that strange fluid gait that didn't quite look human. I backed toward the far edge of the clearing, but more figures emerged from the trees. Dozens of them, all wearing faces I didn't recognize, but all showing the same wrong proportions, the same dead eyes. "How many?" I whispered. "Everyone who ever got lost in these mountains," Jake said. "Everyone who took shelter in the caves during the hard times. The mountain collects us, keeps us, uses us to call in more food." I reached into my pack and pulled out my emergency flare. It was a last resort, meant for signaling rescue teams, but right now it was the only weapon I had. I pulled the cap and struck the igniter, and suddenly the clearing was filled with harsh red light. The hollow people recoiled from the flare like vampires from a cross. They threw their hands up to shield their faces and stepped back into the shadows. In the red light, I could see them more clearly, and what I saw made me sick. Their skin was translucent, showing dark veins underneath. Their clothes were rotting, held together by whatever force animated their bodies. And their shadows were wrong, too long, too dark, moving independently of the bodies that cast them. "Fire," Jake hissed. "He has fire." I held the flare high and backed toward the tree line. They followed, but kept their distance, staying just outside the circle of red light. I had maybe 3 minutes before the flare burned out, and then I'd be alone in the dark with them. I needed to find a way back to the rim of the hollow, back to normal ground where my radio might work again. But which direction was out? In the darkness and confusion of the mine, I'd lost track of where I was. The hollow people knew these mountains better than I did, and they were herding me somewhere specific. The flare sputtered and dimmed. I had maybe 30 seconds left. That's when I heard the sound of an engine. A truck engine, getting closer. Headlights swept through the trees, and I heard the sound of tires on gravel. Someone was driving up the old mining road, coming this way. I wanted to run toward the sound, to flag down whoever it was and get help. But Jake's hollow form smiled wider, showing those pointed teeth. "Right on time," he said. The headlights got brighter, and a familiar green Forest Service truck emerged from the trees. It pulled to a stop at the edge of the clearing, and the driver's door opened. Bill Henderson, my supervisor, stepped out with a flashlight in one hand and a rifle in the other. "Tom," he called. "There you are. We've been looking everywhere for you." For a moment, I felt a surge of hope. Bill was real, solid, normal. He'd come to rescue me from this nightmare. But then I looked closer and saw that his shadow was moving wrong, just like the others. And when the truck's headlights hit his face, his eyes reflected the light like an animal's. "Bill's been with us for a long time," Jake explained. "Ever since he got lost in Hurricane Creek back in '54. He's very good at calling in rangers when we get hungry." My flare died out, plunging the clearing back into darkness, except for the truck's headlights. The hollow people started moving closer again, no longer held back by the fire. "This is how it works, Tom," the thing wearing Dr. Webb's face said. "We call for help. Rangers come looking for missing hikers. They find us instead. The mountain feeds, and we get new brothers and sisters to share the hunger." "How many rangers?" I asked, backing toward the truck. "Maybe if I could get to Bill's rifle, 7 over the years," Bill's hollow voice answered. "You'd be number 8. We're very patient, very careful. Can't have too many disappearances, or people might stop coming into the mountains altogether." I was almost to the truck when I realized my mistake. The engine was still running, but there was no warmth coming from the exhaust, no steam in the cold air. And when I looked through the windshield, I could see that the seats were covered with decades of dust and debris. This truck had been sitting here since 1954. "The mountain doesn't just take people," Sarah Chen's voice explained. "It takes their whole lives. Everything they owned, everyone they loved." Bill's been driving this truck for 8 years, making the same routes, filing the same reports. No one notices, because no one wants to notice. I understood then. The thing wearing Bill's face had been going through the motions of being human for almost a decade. It went to work every day, signed paychecks, sent rangers out on rescue missions that were really hunting expeditions. And no one had noticed because people see what they expect to see. "How many people know?" I asked. "About us?" "No one," Jake said. "About the disappearances? Everyone. But they tell themselves stories. Bear attacks, falls from cliffs, people who just walked away from their lives and started over somewhere else. Easier than believing the truth." The hollow people had formed a circle around me now, close enough that I could smell the grave dirt scent that clung to their clothes. In the truck's headlights, I could see dozens more of them emerging from the forest. An entire population of the hungry dead, all wearing faces of people who had vanished in these mountains over the decades. "It doesn't hurt," Dr. Rodriguez said. "The mountain is gentle when it feeds. You'll feel cold for a while, then tired, then peaceful. And when you wake up, you'll be part of something bigger than yourself." "What about my family?" I asked. "My friends? You'll remember them for a while," Bill said. "Long enough to write letters explaining that you're taking early retirement, moving to Florida maybe. Long enough to close out your bank account and sell your house. After that, it won't matter anymore." I thought about my wife, Margaret, waiting for me at home. About my daughter, Susan, away at college. About the life I'd built over 39 years. They wanted to take all of that and replace it with hollow hunger. "No," I said. Jake laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "You don't get a choice, partner. None of us did." But I was already moving. I grabbed the emergency axe from Bill's truck and swung it at the nearest hollow person. The blade passed right through Dr. Webb's neck, but instead of blood, black mist poured out of the wound. He stumbled backward, his head hanging at an unnatural angle, but he didn't fall. "Iron," Bill said with interest. "That hurts us, but it won't kill us, Tom. Nothing kills us." I swung the axe again, this time at Jake. The blade caught him in the chest, and he doubled over, more black mist streaming from the wound. But he was still moving, still reaching for me with those ice-cold hands. I ran. The axe gave me a few seconds head start, but I could hear them following. All of them, moving through the forest with inhuman speed and silence. I had no idea which direction led out of the hollow, so I just ran uphill, hoping to reach the rim where normal reality might still exist. Behind me, I could hear Bill's hollow voice calling out on a radio. Tom Ashford is armed and dangerous. Repeat, Ranger Tom Ashford has attacked several people and is fleeing into the forest. All units respond. Even now, even while hunting me, he was playing his role, making sure that if anyone came looking for me, they'd find a story that made sense. Ranger goes crazy, attacks innocent people, disappears into the wilderness. Another tragedy in the dangerous mountains. I reached a steep slope covered with loose rock and started climbing. The hollow people were right behind me, but the rocky ground seemed to slow them down. Maybe they were strongest in the deep places, in caves and mine shafts where the mountain's influence was strongest. At the top of the slope, I found myself on a narrow ridge with steep drops on both sides. Below me, I could see the lights of the real world, scattered houses, the highway, a radio tower blinking in the distance. Normal human civilization, going about its business, completely unaware that something ancient and hungry was feeding in the mountains above them. The hollow people emerged from the trees below me, surrounding the base of the ridge. They didn't try to climb up after me. They just stood there, waiting. "There's nowhere to go, Tom," Jake called up. "You can't stay up there forever, and even if you could, who would believe you?" He was right. Even if I somehow made it back to town, who would believe a story about shape-shifting monsters living in the mountains? I'd sound crazy. They'd probably put me in a psychiatric hospital, and Bill's hollow form would visit me there, playing the concerned supervisor, until they found a way to finish what they'd started. But maybe I didn't need anyone to believe me. Maybe I just needed to make sure the truth was preserved somehow. I pulled out my notebook and started, writing by the light of my emergency flashlight. Everything that had happened, from the strange camp to the impossible footprints to the hollow people wearing familiar faces. I wrote about the symbols carved in the trees, about the mine shafts that connected to something older and hungrier than human understanding. "What are you doing?" "Doctor," Rodriguez called from below. "Leaving a record," I said. "Someone will find this eventually." "No one will believe it," Bill said. "They'll think you went crazy before you died." Maybe. But maybe someone would remember the old stories, the legends about hollow folk that my granddaddy used to tell. Maybe someone would put the pieces together and realize that some of those mountain superstitions had been warnings. I finished writing and sealed the notebook in a waterproof bag from my pack. Then I looked around for somewhere to hide it, somewhere it might survive even if I didn't. That's when I saw the cave. The cave entrance was hidden behind a curtain of ice-covered vines, barely visible from the ridge. It was small, maybe just large enough for a person to crawl through, but it led back into the mountain in a direction that seemed to angle away from the hollow. If the mine shafts were the mountain's feeding ground, maybe this natural cave was outside its influence. I squeezed through the opening and found myself in a narrow passage that opened into a larger chamber. My flashlight revealed something I hadn't expected, more symbols carved into the cave walls, but these were different from the ones I'd seen in the mine. Older, cruder, and arranged around them were offerings, animal bones, bundles of herbs, pieces of metal and stone. Someone had been using this cave as a shelter, or maybe as a sanctuary. I found evidence of old fires, and scratched into the wall near the back of the cave. More recent markings, names and dates, going back decades. People who had hidden here, people who had known about the hollow folk, and tried to warn others. Asterisk, Ellen Morris, 1943. They took my husband, but I got away. Iron hurts them, fire drives them back. Don't let them hear your real name. Asterisk, asterisk, J. Patterson, 1951. The mine connects to caves all through the mountain. They can travel underground for miles. Sealed the Kettle Creek entrance, but there are others. Asterisk, asterisk, Samuel Good, 1959. They're getting bolder, more organized. Someone in town is helping them. Asterisk, Samuel Good. I remembered that name from the missing person reports. Local hunter who vanished during deer season. His truck was found on a logging road, but his body was never recovered. I added my own message to the wall, giving the date and location, describing what I'd seen. Then I hid my notebook in a crack in the rock, along with my ranger badge and ID. If someone found this cave, they'd know who I was and what had happened to me. Outside, I could hear the hollow people moving around the ridge, calling my name, trying to flush me out. But they didn't seem to know about the cave. Maybe the symbols carved here really did offer some protection. I settled in to wait for dawn, hoping that daylight might weaken them enough for me to make a run for it. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, real sunlight was filtering through the cave entrance. Not the gray half-light I'd seen in the hollow, but genuine golden sunshine. I crawled to the opening and looked out. The ridge was empty. No sign of the hollow people anywhere. Below me, Kettle Creek Hollow looked normal in the daylight. Just another valley between forested ridges, peaceful and quiet. I made my way down the slope and back toward the research camp, moving carefully, watching for any sign of movement in the trees. The camp was still there, but now it looked different. The tents were faded and torn, like they'd been sitting there for months instead of days. The equipment was rusted, the food supplies rotted away to nothing. Time moved differently in the hollow. Or maybe the hollow people had the power to make things look normal when they needed to set a trap. I found the old mining road and followed it out of the valley. Every step took me further from that wrongness I'd felt in the hollow, back toward the world where compasses pointed north and watches kept proper time. By the time I reached my truck, parked where I'd left it the day before, my radio was working again. "Base, this is Ashford," I said into the handset. "I'm coming in, need to report on the missing researchers." "Tom?" Bill's voice came back, sounding perfectly normal. "Thank God, we were starting to worry. Did you find them?" For a moment, I wondered if the whole thing had been some kind of hallucination. Stress, maybe, or carbon monoxide poisoning from the mine. But then I looked at my hands and saw the cuts from climbing the limestone shaft, felt the ache in my muscles from running through the forest. "Negative on the researchers," I said. "Evidence of mine gas in the area. I think they may have been overcome and fell into one of the deeper shafts. We'll need a full recovery team and gas detection equipment." There was a pause. Then, "Copy that, Tom. Come on in, and we'll debrief." I drove back to headquarters, but I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in my truck for a long time, watching Bill through the office window. He looked exactly like he always had. Same face, same mannerisms, same way of moving. But now I knew to look for the details. The way his shadow fell just slightly wrong. The way his eyes reflected light when he turned toward a window. How long had he been gone? How long had that thing been wearing his face, signing my paychecks, sending me and other rangers out on rescue missions? I went home to Margaret and told her I wasn't feeling well, that I needed to take some sick time. She fussed over me, brought me soup, said I looked pale and tired. Normal married life, normal human concern. It felt like a gift. That night, I called the state police and reported the missing researchers. I gave them the location of the camp and told them about the dangerous gas levels in the mine. I made sure they knew to approach with full safety equipment and plenty of backup. The next day, the papers reported that the research team had been found dead from carbon monoxide poisoning in an abandoned mine shaft. The entrance was permanently sealed with concrete. Case closed. I put in for a transfer to a different forest, somewhere far from these mountains. My replacement would be working with Bill's hollow form, but maybe he'd be more careful than I had been. Maybe he'd notice the signs, or maybe he'd end up like the 7 rangers who came before me. I still have nightmares about voices calling my name in the darkness. Sometimes I catch myself checking my reflection, making sure my eyes are still the right distance apart, making sure my shadow falls where it should. And whenever I hear about hikers going missing in remote areas, especially near old mines or cave systems, I wonder if there are other places like Kettle Creek Hollow, other mountains with ancient hungers. The Appalachians are old, older than human memory, older than the Cherokee, older than whatever civilization was here before them. There are things in these mountains that were feeding long before people learned to dig down into dark places. If you ever find yourself in a hollow where the air tastes like metal and your compass won't point north, get out immediately. Don't investigate. Don't try to help. Don't listen to familiar voices calling from the darkness. Some hungers are older than coal, and they're very, very patient. The cave is still there, if anyone needs it. Look for the ridge above Kettle Creek Hollow, the one with the steep drops on both sides. Behind the ice-covered vines, you'll find the entrance. The symbols carved there are warnings and protections, left by people who understood what lives in the deep places. And if you find my notebook, please remember that what happened to those 4 researchers could happen to anyone. The Hollow people are still down there, still hungry, still wearing familiar faces, still waiting for the next rescue call.